What happens when a billionaire walks into his own five-star hotel dressed like someone who can't afford a cup of coffee? When Lucas Hale pushed through the brass doors of the Grand Crest that Tuesday afternoon, he looked like exactly the kind of person his own staff had been trained to ignore. Ripped jeans, faded jacket, scuffed boots. But what he discovered in the next 72 hours would expose a rot so deep it threatened everything he'd built. This is a story about power, dignity, and one waitress who refused to forget what kindness actually means. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The elevator descended with a soft mechanical hum that Lucas had heard 10,000 times before, but never quite like this. Never from the outside looking in. He'd entered the Grand Crest Hotel through the Fifth Avenue entrance at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that felt more like a reckoning than an afternoon. The October air had that particular Manhattan sharpness to it, the kind that cut through expensive wool and cheap denim exactly the same way. Lucas Hale knew that air. He'd walked through it in $1,000 suits, and he'd walked through it in his current outfit. Jeans with an honest-to-God hole in the left knee, a jacket he'd pulled from the back of his closet that still smelled faintly of the construction sites he used to visit, boots that had seen better decades. The doorman hadn't opened the door. That was the first test, and the hotel had already failed it. Lucas pushed through himself, the heavy brass handle cold against his palm, and stepped into the lobby of the crown jewel in his hotel empire. The Grand Crest, 43 stories of Manhattan luxury, 278 rooms, a Michelin-starred restaurant, and a rooftop bar that had been featured in so many films Lucas had stopped counting. He'd bought the property 8 years ago when it was called the Kensington and hemorrhaging money, gutted it down to the steel bones, and rebuilt it into something that was supposed to mean something: dignity. That'd be in the word he'd used in every meeting, every design review, every staff training session. "We're not selling rooms," he told his executive team on opening day. "We're selling dignity. Every person who walks through that door should feel like they matter." Now, standing in his own lobby, dressed like someone who'd scraped together enough for a beer at the bar, Lucas wanted to see if those words had ever meant anything at all. The lobby was exactly as he remembered it. Soaring ceilings with restored 1920s plasterwork, Italian marble floors that caught the afternoon light in pools of gold. Leather furniture arranged in conversation clusters that suggested old money and older sophistication. The air smelled like it always did, some proprietary blend of bergamot and cedar that cost more per ounce than most people spent on cologne. Everything looked perfect. That was the problem. Lucas moved toward the front desk, his boots making small squeaking sounds on the marble that seemed obscenely loud in the hushed space. A couple in matching Burberry coats glanced at him, then away. Quick, dismissive. The kind of look that said you don't belong here without using words. Behind the sleek black granite counter, 2 desk clerks stood in crisp uniforms, the charcoal suits with subtle pinstripes that Lucas had personally approved, the small gold name tags that caught the light just so. The woman on the left was helping an older gentleman with what looked like a suite upgrade, her smile professional and warm. The man on the right was typing something into his computer with the kind of intense focus that suggested he absolutely was not typing anything important. Lucas approached the counter and waited. The male clerk, name tag reading Brandon M., continued typing. His fingers moved across the keyboard with theatrical precision. His eyes locked on a screen that Lucas could see from his angle was displaying the hotel's internal email system. Reading. Not working. Just reading. Lucas cleared his throat softly. Brandon's eyes flicked up for a fraction of a second. Lucas saw the assessment happen in real time. The scan up and down, the mental calculation, the decision. Then Brandon's eyes returned to his screen. "Someone will be with you in a moment," Brandon said. His tone wasn't rude exactly, just empty, the vocal equivalent of the look the couple had given him. Lucas nodded and stepped back slightly. He could feel the weight of his wallet in his back pocket, the one with the IDs and credit cards that could buy this entire building twice over. He could end this performance right now, flash a card, watch the scramble, but that would defeat the purpose. He needed to see what was real. The woman finished with her guest, sending him off with a smile that actually reached her eyes, then immediately turned to reorganize a stack of brochures that didn't need reorganizing. Lucas watched her hands move, straightening, aligning, busy work that kept her from having to acknowledge him. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. A well-dressed woman with a Louis Vuitton bag approached the desk from Lucas's right, not quite cutting in front of him, but not exactly waiting her turn either. Brandon's posture changed immediately, shoulders back, smile engaged. "Good afternoon," Brandon said, and his voice had color now, warmth. "How can I help you today?" Lucas took another step back and let it happen. He watched the woman ask about restaurant reservations, watched Brandon lean into his computer with helpful efficiency, watched the whole interaction play out with the kind of attentive care that should have been universal, but clearly wasn't. When the woman left, Brandon's eyes passed over Lucas like he was furniture. "Actually," Lucas said, keeping his voice quiet, "I was hoping to get some information about—" "The concierge desk is right over there, sir." Brandon pointed toward a smaller desk near the elevators without looking up. "They handle general inquiries." "Sir?" The word sounded like it hurt him to say. "Right," Lucas said. "Thanks." He turned and walked toward the concierge desk, then past it, then toward the elevator bank. He wasn't going up. He just needed space to think, to process what he'd already learned in less than 5 minutes. The Grand Crest had a disease, and it was terminal. He found a chair near the elevators, tucked into an alcove that probably looked charming in the architectural renderings, but in reality was just a dead zone where the lobby's energy couldn't quite reach. The kind of spot where hotel guests sat when they were waiting for someone who was running late, when they needed to make an uncomfortable phone call, when they were killing time before catching a flight. Lucas had never noticed this particular corner before. From his office on the 37th floor, from his corner booth in the restaurant, from the private penthouse suite where he occasionally stayed when work ran too late, this part of the hotel simply didn't exist. But from here, sitting in a chair with worn upholstery that no one had flagged for replacement, Lucas could see everything. He watched a young couple approach the front desk, backpacks, casual clothes, excited smiles that marked them as tourists, probably their first time in Manhattan. He watched Brandon's body language go cold, watched him direct them to the standard check-in queue, even though there was no one else waiting. Watched the couple's excitement dim just slightly as they shuffled to the side. He watched an older black man in a beautiful suit approach the concierge desk, watched the concierge's smile falter for just a heartbeat before engaging, long enough to make Lucas wonder what that hesitation meant, what it cost. He watched a woman in yoga pants and a stained hoodie walk through the lobby toward the public restrooms, watched the security guard's hand move to his radio, watched the silent calculation of whether she was a guest or a problem, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not since the early days, not since he was building his first property with money he'd scraped together from a business he'd sold for barely enough to matter. Not since he was young and hungry and absolutely certain that he could build something different. He felt ashamed. Lucas Hale had made his first million in commercial real estate by the time he was 26, buying struggling properties in secondary markets, fixing what was broken, and selling them for 3 times what he'd paid. He'd made his first $100 million by 30, expanding into hotel acquisitions with a simple philosophy. Buy what's dying, fix what's broken, make it mean something. He'd built an empire on that philosophy, 15 luxury hotels across the country, each one a property he'd personally rebuilt from the ground up, each one carrying his fingerprints in every design choice, every operational decision, every mission statement. And somehow, when he wasn't looking, someone had hollowed out the thing that mattered most. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, a text from Rachel, his executive assistant. Board meeting moved to 4 p.m. Thompson needs the Q3 numbers before then. Where are you? Lucas typed back. Doing research. Send him last month's deck. I'll call in if needed. He pocketed the phone and leaned back in the chair, letting his head rest against the wall. From this angle, he could see the massive crystal chandelier that hung in the center of the lobby, an original piece from 1928 that he'd spent $250,000 restoring. It scattered light across the marble floors in patterns that looked like shattered stars. Pretty, expensive, meaningless if the people underneath it had forgotten why they were here. A sound cut through his thoughts, sharp, sudden, out of place. A child crying. Lucas's eyes tracked the source. Near the lobby cafe, a little girl in a pink dress was standing next to an overturned chair, tears streaming down her face. Her mother was bent down next to her, trying to soothe her, but the girl was inconsolable. On the floor between them lay a stuffed rabbit, gray with age and love, one ear hanging by threads. The mother picked up the rabbit, tried to hand it to her daughter, but the girl shook her head violently. Something was wrong with it. The fall had done some damage Lucas couldn't see from this distance. Hotel guests flowed around them like water around stones. No one stopped. No one offered help. The mother looked up, clearly embarrassed, clearly hoping someone from the hotel staff might notice. The cafe was only 15 feet away. Lucas could see a server behind the counter, polishing wine glasses with methodical precision, eyes down, deliberately not seeing. And then someone moved. A woman in the cafe's uniform, simple black pants, white button-down shirt, small apron, emerged from behind the counter with a pace that wasn't rushed but wasn't slow either. She crossed the distance to the crying child in 6 steps, then did something Lucas hadn't seen any of his staff do in the last 20 minutes. She knelt down. Not a crouch, not a lean. She went down on one knee on the marble floor, bringing herself to the child's eye level, and when she spoke, her voice was soft enough that Lucas had to strain to hear it. "Hey there, that's a beautiful rabbit. What's his name?" The little girl hiccuped, her crying stuttering to a halt. Mr. Flops. Mr. Flops. That's a perfect name." The woman held out her hand. "I'm Emily. Can I see him for just a second? I think I might be able to help." The mother started to say something, probably an apology, probably a dismissal, but Emily glanced up at her with a small smile that somehow communicated both respect and reassurance, and the mother closed her mouth. The little girl handed over the rabbit. Emily examined it with the kind of serious attention usually reserved for important documents, turning it over in her hands, testing the damaged ear gently. Lucas watched her face. It was an interesting face, he thought. Not beautiful in any conventional way, but open, readable. The kind of face that hadn't learned to hide what it was feeling. "I see the problem," Emily said. "Mr. Flops took a pretty hard fall and his ear got a little loose, but I think we can fix this. Do you want to help me?" The girl nodded, sniffling. Emily reached into her apron pocket and pulled out. Lucas leaned forward slightly to see a safety pin. Where the hell had she gotten a safety pin? Did the cafe staff just carry sewing supplies? With careful fingers, Emily pinned the loose ear back to the rabbit's head, tucking the pin underneath the fabric where it wouldn't poke. It wasn't a permanent fix. The ear still hung at an odd angle, but it was enough. The rabbit looked wounded but whole. "There," Emily said, handing Mr. Flops back. "He's very brave, but he might need some rest after all that excitement. Think you can take care of him?" The little girl clutched the rabbit to her chest and nodded solemnly. Emily stood up and Lucas saw her wince slightly as her knee straightened, a small tell that suggested she'd been on her feet for hours already. She smiled at the mother. "You folks have a wonderful rest of your day." "Thank you," the mother said, and there was real gratitude in her voice. "That was so kind. No need." Emily's smile widened just a fraction. "That's what we're here for." She walked back to the cafe, and the lobby swallowed her up like she'd never been there at all. The mother and daughter moved toward the elevator bank, crisis averted. The flow of the lobby returned to normal, and Lucas sat very still in his forgotten corner, thinking about safety pins and what they meant. That was when he decided to stay, not for an hour, not for the afternoon. He pulled out his phone and sent 3 texts in quick succession. To Rachel. "Cancel everything for the rest of the week. Family emergency. I'll check email, but I'm unavailable for calls." To his sister Margaret, who was watching his daughter. "Can you keep Sophie through the weekend?" Something came up with work. To himself, in the Notes app, where he kept his running list of problems that needed fixing. Grand Crest, cultural failure. Staff bias clear. Service discriminatory. Need complete diagnostic. Then he settled deeper into his chair and prepared to watch his empire crumble in real time. The afternoon wore on. Lucas watched Brandon at the front desk direct a young man with tattoos visible on his neck toward the standard rooms without asking what he needed. Watched the concierge spend 15 minutes planning a helicopter tour for a guest in a Rolex, but barely 2 minutes helping a family find directions to a free museum. Watched the security guard tail a Hispanic woman in a cleaning uniform until she produced her staff ID, even though she'd walked in through the employee entrance. Patterns. That was what Lucas was trained to see. He'd built his entire business on recognizing patterns, in markets, in properties, in people. And the pattern here was unmistakable. The Grand Crest had created a 2-tiered system. Not officially, not in any written policy, but in the unspoken language of who deserved attention and who didn't, who got smiles and who got efficiency, who belonged and who was tolerated. It made him physically sick. Around 4 o'clock, the lobby cafe started to fill up with the early dinner crowd, guests returning from afternoon activities, business travelers settling in for a drink before evening calls, locals who knew the cafe served the best espresso in Midtown. Lucas watched the servers navigate the space with practiced efficiency. There were 3 of them working the floor, plus whoever was behind the counter. Emily was one of them. He watched her work for an hour without meaning to, just because she was impossible not to watch once you started paying attention. She moved differently than the other servers, quieter, less performative. She didn't smile with her whole face when she greeted guests, just a small upturn at the corners of her mouth that somehow felt more genuine than the broader, practiced smiles of her colleagues. She asked questions that seemed to actually want answers. "How was your afternoon?" Delivered in a tone that suggested she might listen to the response. And she noticed things. When an older woman struggled to pull out her chair, Emily was there in 3 steps, helping ease it back. When a businessman spilled coffee on his papers, Emily had napkins in hand before he'd finished cursing. When a teenage girl sat alone looking at her phone with the particular hunched shoulders of someone trying not to cry, Emily quietly placed a glass of water on her table without comment, just a small acknowledgement that she'd been seen. Small things. Forgettable things. Except Lucas couldn't forget them. Around 5:30, Lucas stood up and stretched. His back complained. The chair was worse than it looked. He walked slowly toward the cafe, hands in his pockets, trying to look like someone who'd just decided on a whim to grab a coffee. The cafe was designed to feel like an extension of the lobby. Same marble floors, same sophisticated lighting, but with warm wood accents and plants that softened the space. Small tables clustered near the windows, larger booths along the back wall, a long bar counter where solo guests could sit and watch the baristas work. It was designed to feel approachable while maintaining the hotel's luxury aesthetic. Lucas chose a small table near the window and sat down. From here, he had a clear view of Fifth Avenue, the pedestrian traffic, the taxis, the late afternoon sun hitting the buildings across the street in that particular October gold that photographers paid thousands to capture. Emily appeared at his table within 30 seconds. Up close, Lucas revised his earlier assessment. Not an interesting face, a kind face. There was a difference. She looked tired, the kind of tired that lived behind the eyes and didn't show up in the mirror until you really looked. Early 30s, he guessed. No wedding ring. Hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that had started to escape around her face in wisps that suggested a long shift. "Good evening," she said. "Can I get you something?" Her voice matched her face, soft, careful, like she was used to people not listening and had learned to make every word count. "Coffee," Lucas said. "Black. Whatever you recommend." Emily nodded, and Lucas saw something flicker in her expression. A small surprise, maybe, that he'd asked for a recommendation instead of demanding a specific brand. "The house blend is excellent. Single origin from Colombia. Chocolate notes, not too acidic. Perfect." She turned to go, and Lucas found himself speaking again without planning to. "That was really kind, earlier, with the little girl." Emily stopped and looked back at him. For a moment, Lucas thought she didn't know what he was talking about. Then recognition dawned, and she shrugged in a way that suggested the entire incident had already been filed away in her mind as unremarkable. "Oh, that," she was upset. "Most people walked right past." "Yeah." Emily's face did something complicated. Not quite a frown, not quite resignation. "Most people do." She left before Lucas could respond, and he sat back in his chair thinking about those 4 words and all the weight they carried. The coffee arrived 3 minutes later, brought by a different server, a young man with practiced charm and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Lucas thanked him and wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into his palms. He'd made billions of dollars by reading people, by understanding what motivated them, what scared them, what they wanted versus what they needed. He could walk into a negotiation and know within 5 minutes where the leverage was, who would fold first, what concessions were real and which were theater. But sitting in this cafe, drinking excellent coffee in a hotel he owned, Lucas realized he'd lost the ability to read the people who actually mattered. When had that happened? When had he stopped seeing the Emilys of the world? The people who showed up every day and did the small, essential work of making strangers feel human? When had he started seeing only the numbers, the profit margins, the quarterly reports that told him his hotels were successful without telling him whether they were good? His phone buzzed. Thompson, his CFO, calling about the board meeting he'd blown off. Lucas declined the call and put the phone face down on the table. He drank his coffee slowly, watching the cafe fill and empty and fill again as the evening crowd cycled through. He watched Emily move between tables, her efficiency never tipping into coldness, her attention never fragmenting into distraction. He watched the way guests responded to her, most barely acknowledged her existence. Some were polite, a few were rude in the casual way people were rude to service workers, treating them as extensions of the furniture. Emily absorbed it all with the same quiet grace she'd shown the crying child. She didn't push back against rudeness, didn't seek recognition for kindness. She just worked, present, attentive, invisible. Around 7 o'clock, Lucas saw something that made him set down his coffee cup slowly. A man in an expensive suit, 50s, silver hair, the kind of confident bearing that came from never being told no, had just sat down at a table near the window. Emily approached with her usual quiet professionalism. Lucas was too far away to hear the conversation, but he could read the body language clearly enough. The man ordered. Emily nodded and turned to go. Then the man's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Not hard, not violently, just a casual grab, the kind of touch that said, "I'm not done with you yet." Lucas was halfway out of his chair before he realized he was moving. Emily had gone very still. She looked down at the hand on her wrist, then up at the man's face. Her expression was carefully blank, the kind of blank that came from practice, from knowing that any visible reaction would make things worse. The man said something. Emily nodded. He let go of her wrist and waved her away with a dismissive gesture. Emily walked back toward the counter, and Lucas watched the small tremor in her hands as she entered the order into the system, a tremor she controlled within seconds, professional mask sliding back into place like it had never slipped. Lucas sat back down very carefully. His hands were shaking slightly, from anger or adrenaline, he wasn't sure which. Maybe both. He'd seen enough. This wasn't just about poor service or discriminatory treatment. It was about a fundamental rot in the culture he'd supposedly built. A rot that allowed guests to treat staff like objects, that allowed staff to treat certain guests like problems, that had turned his vision of dignity into a parody where only some people deserved to be seen as human. And Emily, quiet, invisible Emily, who carried safety pins in her apron and knelt down to comfort crying children, was trapped in the middle of it, absorbing all the small cruelties that made the machine run smoothly. Lucas pulled out his phone and sent one more text. To Paul Hendricks, the general manager of the Grand Crest, his hand-picked leader who he'd trusted to maintain the hotel's culture. We need to talk. Tomorrow. My office. 9 a.m., non-negotiable. Then he stood up, left $40 on the table for a $12 coffee, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. He didn't go home. Instead, he walked 3 blocks to a small bar he used to frequent back before his life got complicated. Before the empire, before the divorce, before becoming a single father to a 7-year-old daughter who needed him to be stable and present and whole. He sat at the bar and ordered whiskey and tried to figure out what the hell he was going to do. The bartender was a woman in her 60s who'd worked there for 30 years and remembered Lucas from when he used to come in smelling like construction dust and possibility. You look like someone who just found out bad news, she said, sliding his drink across the scarred wood bar. Lucas took a sip and let the burn ground him. Found out something I should have known all along. That's usually the worst kind. Yeah, she left him alone after that, and Lucas sat with his whiskey and his thoughts, and the growing certainty that fixing the Grand Crest wasn't going to be as simple as firing a few people or implementing new policies. He needed to burn it down and rebuild it from the inside out. But first, he needed to understand exactly what had been lost, and that meant going back. Watching more, documenting the patterns until he had a complete picture of the disease. His phone buzzed with messages he didn't read. The bar filled with the after-work crowd, people in suits, people in jeans, people who'd had good days and bad days, and were trying to wash them both away with alcohol and conversation. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 3 blocks away, a man who could buy their entire apartment building was having an existential crisis about safety pins. Lucas finished his drink and ordered another. Somewhere in Manhattan, Emily Carter was finishing her shift, her wrist probably still feeling the phantom pressure of a stranger's grip. Her mind probably already filing it away as just another thing that happened in the service industry. Nothing personal, nothing worth remembering. Somewhere in that same city, Brandon at the front desk was going home feeling like he'd done his job well, never questioning why some guests got warmth and others got efficiency. And somewhere in the penthouse of the Grand Crest Hotel, in an office overlooking Central Park, Paul Hendricks was probably reading Lucas's text and feeling the first flutter of professional panic. Good, Lucas thought. Let him panic. Because tomorrow, everything was going to change. He just had to figure out how. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He lay in his apartment on the Upper West Side, staring at the ceiling while his mind replayed the day in fragments that wouldn't settle into anything coherent. The look on Emily's face when that man grabbed her wrist, the way Brandon's eyes had skimmed over him like he was wallpaper, the little girl clutching a rabbit held together with a safety pin. At 4 a.m, he gave up pretending and made coffee in the kitchen that cost more than most people's cars, but still produced the same caffeine as a $20 machine. Money didn't buy better sleep. It just bought bigger spaces to be awake in. His phone sat on the marble counter, dark and silent. He'd turned off notifications around midnight after the 100th message from his executive team asking where he was, what was wrong, whether they should be worried. Let them worry. He had bigger problems than their quarterly anxieties. By 6 a.m., Lucas was showered, dressed in another carefully chosen outfit. Clean jeans this time, but still old. A pullover sweater with a frayed collar. Boots that had actual wear patterns instead of the artificially distressed kind that cost $300. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw someone who could be anyone. A contractor between jobs. A grad student on a budget. A man whose credit card might get declined at checkout. Perfect. He called his sister while walking to the subway. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" Margaret's voice was rough with sleep. "Sophie awake yet?" "Lucas, it's 6:15 in the morning. No, your daughter is not awake. Normal children sleep past dawn. Can you keep her through Sunday? I know I said the weekend, but I need a few more days." Silence on the other end, the kind that meant Margaret was deciding between concern and annoyance. "What's going on?" "Work thing. I'll explain later." "You always say that." "I know. I'm sorry. Is she okay?" "She's fine. She's always fine with me. It's you I'm worried about." Lucas stepped onto the street, the early morning air sharp enough to make his eyes water. "Don't be. I just need to fix something." "Lucas, thank you, Marg. Really. I'll make it up to her." He hung up before she could push harder, guilt settling in his stomach like concrete. Sophie deserved better than a father who disappeared for days at a time to conduct secret investigations into his own business. But she also deserved a father who built things that mattered, who didn't compromise on the values he claimed to hold. He'd figure out how to balance those two truths later. The subway ride downtown was packed with early commuters, everyone pressed together in that particular New York intimacy of strangers trying desperately not to touch. Lucas stood near the doors, holding the pole with one hand, phone with the other, scrolling through internal reports he'd pulled up the night before. Guest satisfaction scores at the Grand Crest had dropped 3 percentage points in the last 6 months. Not catastrophic, not even enough to trigger alarm bells, but consistent, steady. The kind of decline that suggested something systemic rather than a temporary blip. Employee turnover was up 17% year over year. Again, not dramatic, but wrong. The Grand Crest used to have the lowest turnover in his entire portfolio. And then there were the complaints. Lucas read through them on the rattling subway car, each one a small cut that accumulated into something worse. Guest complaints about rude staff. Staff complaints about hostile guests. Everyone complaining about everyone else, and no one taking responsibility for the culture that allowed it. He got off at 59th and walked the remaining blocks to the hotel, arriving just after 7 a.m. The morning shift would be starting soon. New faces, new patterns to observe. He wanted to see if yesterday was an anomaly or a symptom. The lobby was quieter at this hour, populated mostly by business travelers grabbing coffee before early meetings and a few bleary-eyed tourists who hadn't adjusted to the time zone yet. Lucas found his spot in the forgotten alcove near the elevators and settled in to watch. The morning front desk clerk was a woman in her 40s named Patricia, according to her name tag. Lucas watched her greet the first guest of the day, a man in running gear who looked like he'd just finished a loop through Central Park. Her smile was genuine, her attention focused. Good start. Then a young woman approached the desk, maybe 25, wearing scrubs under a heavy coat that suggested she'd just finished a night shift somewhere. Nurse, probably. She looked exhausted in that deep bone way that came from taking care of people for 12 hours straight. Patricia's smile thinned. Not much, just a degree or two cooler. Can I help you? I'm checking out of room 847, the young woman said. I just need to settle the bill. ID and credit card, please. The transaction was efficient, professional, and completely devoid of the warmth Patricia had shown the runner. When it was done, the young woman left with a tired thank you that Patricia barely acknowledged. Lucas made a note on his phone, then another as he watched Patricia handle the next 3 guests, warm to the businessman, efficient to the family with 2 small children, cold to the older man in a maintenance uniform who'd come to ask a question about a room repair. Patterns. Around 8, Lucas moved to the cafe for breakfast. He chose a different table this time, closer to the counter where he could observe the morning service. Emily wasn't working, her shift probably started later, but the morning crew had their own dynamics worth studying. He ordered eggs and toast from a server named Marcus, who had the particular intensity of someone working 2 jobs and running on 4 hours of sleep. The food arrived quickly, perfectly prepared, and Marcus managed to make Lucas feel welcome despite clearly being slammed with orders. Lucas ate slowly and watched the cafe fill with the breakfast rush. Guests getting fueled before meetings, families planning their day, couples reading newspapers in comfortable silence. Normal hotel life, the kind he'd designed his properties to facilitate. Except every 15 minutes or so, something would happen that reminded him nothing was normal. A server would ignore a guest trying to flag them down, then immediately appear when someone in business attire raised a hand. The host would seat a well-dressed couple at a window table while directing a pair of backpackers to a spot near the kitchen despite the entire cafe being half empty. Small choices. Constant choices. Each one sending a message about who mattered. By 9 a.m., Lucas was back in the lobby, watching the morning chaos of checkouts and late arrivals. The hotel was hitting its rhythm now, staff moving with practiced efficiency through the carefully choreographed dance of luxury hospitality. And then he saw Emily. She came through the employee entrance near the back of the lobby, already in uniform, hair pulled back in the same practical ponytail. Lucas watched her pause just inside the door, her shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath, the kind of breath people took before walking into something difficult. Then she straightened and moved toward the cafe with steady purpose. Lucas gave her 10 minutes to settle into her shift before following. The lunch prep was already underway when he entered, the cafe transforming from breakfast service to midday dining with the kind of seamless transition that looked effortless but required serious coordination. Emily was setting up her section, checking salt shakers, folding napkins into the precise triangles the hotel standard required. Lucas took a table in her section and waited. She appeared within a minute, that same quiet presence he'd noticed yesterday. Up close in better light, Lucas could see the small details that told stories. A scar on her left hand that looked old and deep, fingernails cut short and practical, eyes that were careful in a way that suggested caution was a learned behavior. "Good morning," Emily said. "Coffee to start?" "Please." Lucas paused, then added, "You probably don't remember, but you helped me yesterday with the coffee recommendation." A flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Right. The Colombian blend, how was it?" "Excellent. You know your coffee." "Part of the job." She pulled out her order pad, and Lucas saw her hands were steady today. Whatever had shaken her yesterday had been locked away somewhere he couldn't see. "Are you staying at the hotel?" It was a reasonable question, casual enough, but Lucas heard the subtext. "You don't look like our usual guests." He could use this, should use this. "Just visiting the city," he said. "Someone recommended the cafe, said the service was exceptional." Something shifted in Emily's expression, not quite surprised, but close, like she was trying to figure out if he was making fun of her. "Well, whoever they are, I hope we live up to it. What can I get you?" Lucas ordered a sandwich he didn't want and watched Emily write it down with careful precision, each letter formed completely, nothing rushed. When she left, He pulled out his laptop and pretended to work while actually watching the cafe dynamics unfold. Emily moved through her section with the same quiet efficiency he'd noticed before. She didn't try to upsell, didn't perform friendliness, just provided steady, attentive service that somehow felt more genuine than the theatrical warmth of some other servers. She asked questions that seemed to actually want answers. She noticed when water glasses were empty before guests had to ask. She cleared plates without interrupting conversations. And she was almost completely invisible. Lucas watched guests interact with her for 2 hours, and the pattern was unmistakable. They ordered, she served, they ate, she cleared. The entire transaction happening in a space where Emily existed as a function rather than a person. Most didn't say thank you. Several didn't make eye contact. A few spoke to her with that particular tone people used when addressing service workers. Not quite rude, but stripped of the social niceties they'd use with equals. Emily absorbed it all without visible reaction. Professional armor firmly in place. Around 1 p.m., Lucas saw her take a break, slipping out the cafe's back entrance toward the employee area. He waited 5 minutes, then followed. The employee corridor was a different world from the guest spaces. Fluorescent lights instead of chandeliers, linoleum instead of marble. The harsh functionality of a space designed for efficiency rather than experience. Lucas had been down here before during construction, but never during operating hours. Never when it was filled with the people who made his hotel run. He found Emily in a small break room, sitting alone at a table with a sandwich that looked like she'd brought it from home. She was staring at her phone with an expression that made Lucas hesitate in the doorway. She looked up, and surprise registered on her face. "Oh, can I help you?" Guests aren't usually... "Sorry," Lucas said quickly. "I was looking for a restroom and got turned around. Guest restrooms are back in the lobby, through the main corridor." She pointed, then seemed to realize he was still standing there. "Are you lost?" "Probably." Lucas took a chance. "Mind if I ask you something?" Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, and Lucas saw her posture shift. Not defensive, exactly, but wary. The look of someone who'd learned to be careful around strangers. "What kind of something?" "How long have you worked here?" 2 years. Why?" "Do you like it?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She set down her sandwich and studied him with new attention, trying to figure out what he wanted. "That's a weird thing to ask." "I know. I'm sorry. I'm a consultant." The lie came easily, smooth as practice. "I'm doing research on hospitality industry satisfaction, employee experience, guest experience, how they intersect. Would you be willing to talk to me for a few minutes? I can pay you for your time." "I don't have much time. My break ends in 10 minutes. 10 minutes is fine." Emily looked at him for a long moment, weighing something Lucas couldn't read. Then she shrugged. "Okay, but I can't tell you anything confidential about hotel operations." "I'm not asking for confidential information, just your experience." Lucas pulled out the chair across from her. "So, do you like working here?" "It's a job." "That's not an answer." "Sure it is." Emily picked up her sandwich, took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. "It's a job. It pays okay. The benefits are decent. I show up, I do my work, I go home. That's what a job is." "But do you like it?" She set the sandwich down again and leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Why does it matter?" "Because happy employees provide better service. Better service means better guest experiences. Better guest experiences mean better business. It's all connected." That sounds like something from a corporate training manual. Lucas smiled despite himself. "It probably is, but that doesn't make it wrong." Emily was quiet for a moment, and Lucas could see her deciding how honest to be with a stranger who claimed to be a consultant but was asking questions that felt personal. Finally, she spoke. "I used to like it more. When I first started, the hotel felt different then, like everyone was trying to make something good. Now it feels like everyone's just trying to get through their shift without anything going wrong." "What changed?" "I don't know. Little things, I guess. The manager used to know everyone's names, used to check in with us about how we were doing. Now he mostly just sends emails about efficiency metrics. We used to have staff meetings where people could actually talk about problems. Now we just get lectured about maintaining standards." She paused. "I sound like I'm complaining." "You sound like you're being honest." "Well, honesty doesn't pay the rent." Emily glanced at the clock on the wall. "I should get back." "One more question," Lucas said. Yesterday I saw you help a little girl who'd dropped her toy. You had a safety pin in your apron. Why do you carry a safety pin? Emily blinked, surprised by the shift. You noticed that? I notice a lot of things. It's just practical. People need things sometimes. Safety pins, Band-Aids, aspirin. I keep a little kit in my apron. Never know when it'll come in handy. Your job description probably doesn't include keeping a first aid kit in your pocket. No, Emily said slowly, but my job is to take care of guests, and sometimes taking care of people means having a safety pin when a kid's toy breaks. The job description doesn't cover everything that matters. Lucas felt something shift in his chest. Recognition, maybe, or vindication. This was it. This was what he'd built the Grand Crest to be. Not the marble floors or the crystal chandeliers or the Michelin-starred restaurant. This. Someone who understood that hospitality was about seeing people and responding to what they needed, even when no one was watching, even when it wasn't in the manual. Thank you, he said, for your time. Emily stood, brushing crumbs off her apron. Can I ask you something now? Sure. Are you actually a consultant? Lucas met her eyes and saw that she'd already figured out the answer. Not the full truth, she didn't know who he was, but she knew he wasn't what he claimed. Why do you ask? Because consultants usually have clipboards and ask questions that sound like they came from a script. You're asking questions like you're trying to figure something out, like it's personal. Smart. She was smarter than people probably gave her credit for. What if I said, I'm trying to understand how things really work, not how they're supposed to work? Then I'd say you're in the right place, because there's a pretty big gap between those two things around here. She moved toward the door, then paused. If you really want to understand how things work, don't just watch during the day shift. Come back on a Friday night when we're slammed and the guests have been drinking. That's when you see what people are actually made of. She left before Lucas could respond. He sat in the empty break room for another minute, thinking about safety pins and what they revealed about character. Then he pulled out his phone and typed a note to himself. Friday night. See what breaks when the pressure increases. The rest of Wednesday passed in careful observation. Lucas moved through the hotel like a ghost, occupying the spaces between attention, watching the machine operate. He saw the good. Staff members who genuinely cared, guests who treated everyone with respect, moments of real connection that reminded him why he'd wanted to build hotels in the first place. But he also saw the rot spreading deeper than he'd thought. He saw the housekeeping supervisor berate a maid in the hallway for taking too long on a room, using a tone that made Lucas's hands clench. He saw the concierge steer wealthy guests toward expensive restaurant partners that probably paid kickbacks while directing budget-conscious families to chains. He saw a maintenance worker get yelled at by a guest for fixing a toilet too loudly and watched none of the nearby staff intervene. By Thursday morning, Lucas had filled 30 pages of notes on his phone. Incidents, patterns, names, a complete diagnostic of everything that had gone wrong with his hotel's culture. At 9 a.m., he walked into the Grand Crest's administrative offices on the third floor, a space guests never saw. All practical furniture and harsh lighting and the ambient hum of people doing paperwork. He took the elevator up, nodded at the receptionist who didn't recognize him in his street clothes, and walked straight into Paul Hendricks's office without knocking. Paul was on the phone, his back to the door, looking out over Central Park while talking to someone about linen suppliers. He spun around when he heard the door, his face cycling through confusion and recognition and panic in rapid succession. I'll call you back, Paul said into the phone, then hung up and stood. Lucas, I didn't realize you were coming in today. I thought we were meeting yesterday. Plans changed. Lucas closed the door behind him and stayed standing. How long have you been general manager here, Paul? 4 years. You know that. And in those 4 years, what have you done to maintain the culture we established when we opened? Paul's confusion deepened. I don't understand the question. We maintain all standards. Our scores don't tell you anything real. They tell you what people are willing to put in a survey. I'm asking about culture, the actual day-to-day experience of working here and being a guest here. Lucas, what's going on? Your assistant said this was urgent, but she wouldn't tell me. I spent the last 3 days in this hotel undercover, dressed like a regular person, watching how staff treats guests, how guests treat staff, how everyone treats each other when they think no one important is paying attention. The color drained from Paul's face. You what? I sat in the lobby. I ate in the cafe. I watched your front desk turn away people based on how they looked. I watched servers get grabbed by guests and no one did anything about it. I watched this entire operation function on a two-tiered system where only certain people get treated like they matter. That's not... We don't... Paul was floundering now, his professional composure cracking. If there were incidents, we have procedures, complaint systems. You should have come to me. I'm coming to you now, and I'm telling you that your procedures aren't working. Your complaint systems aren't working. Because the problem isn't individual incidents. It's the entire culture you've built here. Paul's face flushed red. That's not fair. I've done everything you asked. I've maintained standards, kept costs down, improved efficiency. You've optimized for the wrong things. Lucas leaned against the desk, suddenly tired. When did we start caring more about efficiency than dignity? We care about both. Do we? Because I watched a waitress yesterday carry a first aid kit in her apron because she knows guests might need help and the hotel won't provide it. I watched your front desk clerk spend 15 minutes helping a guest in a Rolex but brush off a nurse in scrubs. I watched your security guard profile a Hispanic woman just for walking through the lobby. And none of it was written down in any report because it's all become so normal that no one even sees it anymore. Paul sat down heavily in his chair. What do you want me to do? I want you to tell me how this happened. I want you to explain to me how a hotel I built on the principle that every person deserves dignity turned into a place where dignity is reserved for people who can afford it. Silence filled the office. Outside, Lucas could hear the muted sounds of the administrative floor, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the mundane machinery of running a luxury hotel. When Paul finally spoke, his voice was quieter. You want the truth? I always want the truth. The truth is that maintaining the culture you want is expensive. It takes time. It requires hiring people who actually care, which means paying more and spending more on training and accepting that efficiency will suffer because caring takes time. And every quarter, I get pressure from corporate to improve margins, cut costs, increase revenue per guest, optimize operations. You can't optimize caring, Lucas. You can only optimize efficiency. So that's what we've done. Lucas stared at him. Did I ever tell you to prioritize margins over mission? You didn't have to. The incentive structure did it for you. My bonus is tied to profitability. My team's bonuses are tied to performance metrics. None of those metrics measure whether we're treating people with dignity. They measure whether we're making money. That's going to change. How? Lucas pulled out his phone and opened the notes he'd been compiling. Starting Monday, we're implementing new metrics. Guest satisfaction broken down by demographic, staff retention and exit interview analysis, mystery shopper programs focused on equity of service, culture surveys that actually matter, and we're going to tie management compensation to those metrics. Paul looked stricken. That's going to tank our margins. I don't care. The board will care. The board works for me, not the other way around. And if they have a problem with it, they can bring it to the next meeting, and I'll explain to them why running a hotel that betrays its own values is worse than running one with slightly lower margins. Lucas, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. What's unreasonable is building a hotel on the promise that everyone matters and then systematically treating people like they don't. Lucas stood up. You have until Monday to put together a plan for cultural reform. I want specifics, training programs, policy changes, accountability measures, and I want it to start with the front desk and work through every department. That's 3 days. Then you'd better get started. Lucas walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. One more thing, there's a waitress in the cafe named Emily Carter. I want her personnel file on my desk by end of day. Why? Because she's the only person in this entire hotel who still remembers what we're supposed to be doing here. And I want to know why. He left before Paul could respond, taking the elevator back down to the lobby with his heart pounding. That had been harder than he'd expected. Paul wasn't a bad person. He was just a person who'd been optimizing for the wrong things because the system had told him those were the right things to optimize for. The system Lucas had built, which meant Lucas was responsible for fixing it. He spent the rest of Thursday documenting everything he'd observed, building a case file that would support the changes he planned to implement. Around 3 p.m., his phone rang. Rachel, his assistant, who he'd been avoiding for days. "Where the hell are you?" she said when he answered. "Working. Thompson is losing his mind. The board is asking questions. You've missed 4 meetings. People are worried you're having some kind of breakdown. I'm not having a breakdown, I'm having a reckoning. Those sound suspiciously similar. Rachel, what's my approval rating on decisions? What? When I make a decision about company direction, how often do people push back? Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, people trust your judgment. That's not what I asked. Almost never. People almost never push back. Why? Because you're usually right. And because you own the company. Lucas leaned against the lobby wall, watching the afternoon crowd flow through his hotel. What if I've been wrong? What if I've been optimizing for the same things everyone else optimizes for, and I've just been better at pretending I'm different? Lucas, you're scaring me. Don't be scared. I'm just figuring some things out. I'll be back in the office Monday. Until then, clear my calendar and tell everyone I'm unavailable. What should I tell them you're doing? Tell them I'm learning to see again. He hung up and pocketed the phone. Friday arrived with the kind of cold rain that made everyone miserable and short-tempered. Lucas showed up at the hotel at 5 p.m., ready to watch the evening shift that Emily had recommended. The lobby was already busier than usual. Weekend guests arriving early, business travelers trying to beat the weather, everyone dripping water onto the marble floors and dragging in the stress of a long week. Lucas found a seat at the bar in the lobby lounge, ordered water, and watched the chaos unfold. Emily had been right. This was when you saw what people were made of. The Friday evening crowd brought a different energy to the Grand Crest, something Lucas felt the moment he settled onto his bar stool. The rain had turned the streets into a mess of umbrellas and splashing taxis, and people arrived shaking off water and whatever patience they'd started the day with. By 6 p.m., the lobby was packed with bodies and noise, and the particular tension that came from too many people wanting too many things at once. Lucas nursed his water and watched it all unfold. The front desk was slammed. 3 clerks working simultaneously, a line snaking back toward the elevators, guests checking their watches and muttering to companions about dinner reservations they were going to miss. Brandon was there again, moving with efficient precision that looked impressive until you noticed he was only that efficient with certain guests. The woman in the Chanel suit got his full attention. The family with kids got shuffled to Patricia, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. The young couple speaking Spanish to each other got directed to use the automated kiosk. Small choices. Constant erosion. Lucas made notes on his phone, trying to capture the patterns without being obvious about it. A man 2 seats down at the bar kept glancing at him, probably wondering why someone was sitting at a hotel bar drinking water and typing on their phone like they were working. Lucas ignored him. Around 6:30, the cafe doors opened and Emily emerged for the evening shift. Lucas hadn't been sure she'd be working tonight. Schedules rotated, and he'd been half prepared to spend the evening watching other servers just to see if the problems were universal or specific. But there she was, already looking tired in that way that said she'd probably worked the day shift too and was pulling a double. That shouldn't be happening. His hotels had policies against consecutive shifts without adequate rest periods, but policies only mattered if someone enforced them. Lucas waited until she'd settled into her station before moving from the bar to the cafe. The hostess, a young man with styled hair and a smile that looked expensive, gave him the same assessing look he'd gotten all week, then gestured vaguely toward the back section. "We're quite busy tonight, sir. It might be a wait for a table." "I'll wait," Lucas said. The hostess's smile thinned. "Of course. Name?" "Not necessary. I'll stand." He found a spot near the entrance where he could watch without being in the way. The cafe was chaos barely contained, every table full, servers weaving between chairs with trays held high, the kitchen doors swinging open and closed with mechanical rhythm. The noise level was intense, conversations and laughter, and the clatter of dishes creating a wall of sound that somehow felt both energetic and overwhelming. Emily was handling a 6-table section in the corner, and Lucas watched her work with growing respect. She moved fast but not frantic, carrying that same quiet efficiency he'd noticed before, even under obvious pressure. When a guest snapped fingers at her from across the room, she finished taking an order from another table before heading over, not ignoring the snap, just refusing to let rudeness dictate her priorities. Lucas saw her stop at a table of businessmen who'd clearly started drinking before they arrived. 4 of them, loud and expansive, taking up more space than they needed. Emily approached with her order pad ready. "Evening, gentlemen. What can I get you?" The man closest to her looked up with the particular smile of someone who thought he was charming. "Well, aren't you pretty? What's your name, sweetheart?" Emily's expression didn't change. "Emily, what would you like to drink?" "I'd like your number, Emily." His friends laughed like he'd said something clever. "The bar has an excellent whiskey selection. Can I recommend the Macallan?" "Come on, don't be like that. We're just being friendly." Lucas's hands clenched around his phone. He was too far away to intervene naturally, but every instinct screamed to walk over there and shut it down. He forced himself to stay still, to watch, to see how the systems he'd built actually functioned when tested. Emily's voice stayed level. "The Macallan, then? Or would you prefer to see the full drink menu?" "Jesus, she's no fun." The man waved dismissively. "4 whiskeys, whatever's expensive. We're celebrating." Emily wrote it down and left without another word, her posture straight and controlled. Lucas watched her walk to the bar and saw her hands shake slightly as she entered the order. Just a tremor, quickly controlled. Professional armor back in place. But armor shouldn't be necessary for doing your job. Lucas made a note, then another as he watched similar interactions play out across the cafe. Servers being treated like entertainment instead of professionals. Guests making demands with the expectation of immediate compliance. The constant low-level disrespect that came from people who'd never had to work in service and didn't understand it as real work. Around 7, things escalated. A woman at table 12 sent back her salmon twice. First because it was overcooked, then because it was undercooked. The server handling that section, Marcus, the morning shift guy who must also be pulling a double, took it with strained patience the first time. The second time, Lucas saw his jaw tighten as he carried the plate back to the kitchen. 2 minutes later, the woman was demanding to see a manager. The cafe manager appeared, a thin man in his 50s named Robert, according to his name tag, all apologetic smiles and soothing platitudes. Lucas watched him comp the entire table's meal and offer free desserts while the woman lectured him about quality standards. The whole performance took 10 minutes, during which Marcus stood off to the side looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. When it was over and the woman was satisfied, Robert pulled Marcus aside. Lucas couldn't hear the conversation, but he could read the body language clearly enough. Robert's aggressive posture, Marcus's defensive stance, the back and forth that ended with Marcus's shoulders slumping in defeat, getting blamed for a guest who couldn't be pleased. Lucas had seen it before, but watching it happen in his own hotel made him feel sick. He was about to head over when his phone buzzed. Paul Hendricks, calling for the 3rd time that day. Lucas had been ignoring him, but something made him answer this time. "What?" "We have a situation." Paul's voice was tight. "There's been a complaint. A guest is threatening to post on social media about discriminatory service. She's claiming the front desk refused to honor her reservation because of her race." Lucas felt ice settle in his stomach. "Where is she now?" "Lobby, near the elevators. She's filming. Lucas, this could go viral." "I'll be right there." Lucas hung up and left the cafe, moving through the lobby with purpose. He found the situation quickly enough. A young black woman, maybe late 20s, standing near the elevators with her phone held up and her voice carrying across the marble floors. "Told them I had a confirmation number. I showed them my email. But apparently that doesn't matter if you don't look like their usual clientele." She was addressing the phone, live streaming, her anger controlled but unmistakable. "This is the Grand Crest Hotel in Manhattan. 5 stars, luxury service. Unless you're black, apparently." A small crowd had gathered. Some guests watching with discomfort, others with open curiosity. Brandon stood behind the front desk looking panicked, and Patricia had gone pale. Paul was approaching from the administrative corridor, his professional mask firmly in place, ready to do damage control. Lucas got there first. "Excuse me." He stepped into the woman's field of vision. "I'm very sorry for whatever happened. Can we talk about this?" She turned the camera toward him. "And you are?" "Good question." Lucas made a split-second decision that he hoped he wouldn't regret. "Someone who wants to understand what went wrong." "Will you tell me?" "I'm telling everyone." She gestured to the phone. "That's the point." "I understand, but I'm asking anyway, please." Something in his tone must have registered because she lowered the phone slightly. "Fine. I booked a king suite 3 weeks ago. Confirmation number, credit card on file, everything legitimate. I show up tonight and they tell me there's no reservation." "Did they offer alternatives?" "They offered me a standard room, not what I booked, not what I paid for. And when I pushed back, the clerk suggested maybe I'd made a mistake about which hotel I'd reserved. Lucas felt his jaw tighten. That's unacceptable. You think? Because your colleague over there seemed to think it was perfectly reasonable. She pointed at Brandon, who was trying to become invisible behind his computer screen. Paul had reached them now, smoothing into manager mode. Miss, I'm Paul Hendricks, the general manager. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding that we can resolve. If you'll just come with me to my office, I'm not going anywhere. Her voice was flat. You want to resolve this? Resolve it right here where everyone can see. Paul's smile faltered. That's not how we handle guest concerns. Maybe that's the problem. Lucas looked at Paul. Get the reservation system pulled up, now. I want to see her booking. Lucas, we should handle this privately. Now, Paul. Paul hesitated, then gestured to Brandon. Pull up the reservation. Show us what you've got. Brandon's fingers flew across the keyboard, and Lucas moved behind the desk to see the screen. The woman followed, phone still recording, and Lucas didn't stop her. If they'd screwed this up, they deserved to have it documented. The reservation appeared on screen. King Suite, 3-week advance booking, credit card authorized, confirmation sent. Everything exactly as the woman had described. Then Lucas saw the note attached to the reservation. Added this afternoon. 2 words that made his blood run cold. Verify identity. What does that mean? The woman demanded, reading over his shoulder. Lucas knew exactly what it meant. Someone had flagged her reservation for additional verification, which in practice meant making it harder for her to check in, requiring extra documentation, creating friction that would encourage her to accept a downgrade or go elsewhere. He looked at Brandon. Who added this note? Brandon's face had gone white. I was just following protocol. What protocol requires identity verification for a guest with a confirmed reservation and matching credit card? Silence. The lobby had gone very quiet, everyone watching this confrontation play out. There is no protocol, Lucas said, answering his own question. Someone made a judgment call. Someone decided this guest needed extra scrutiny. Want to explain why? I was concerned about fraud, Brandon stammered. We've had issues with what? Spell it out for me. Brandon looked desperately at Paul, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. The woman with the phone captured all of it, her camera moving between faces. Lucas turned back to her. You're right. This was discrimination. There's no other word for it. And I'm sorry. Not just sorry it happened, but sorry that the systems in place here allowed it to happen. Apologies don't give me my room. No, but this does. Lucas pulled out his wallet, the real one, not the one with old receipts and a Metro card he'd been carrying all week, and handed her a black card. This will get you into the presidential suite on the 42nd floor. It's complimentary for your entire stay, however long you'd like. Full access to all hotel amenities. And when you check out, I want you to send me the video you just recorded. She looked at the card, then at him. Who are you? Lucas Hale. I own this hotel. The lobby went very still. Lucas felt Paul's shock radiating from behind him, felt the weight of everyone's attention shifting, recalculating. He kept his eyes on the woman with the camera. I've spent the last week walking around this place dressed like someone who doesn't belong, watching how staff treats different guests. What just happened to you? I've watched it happen dozens of times in smaller ways. People being judged based on appearance, race, class. This hotel was supposed to be better than that. It's not, but it's going to be. The woman studied him for a long moment. Big words. You'll have them in writing by tomorrow, along with a personal apology and a plan for what we're changing. Lucas looked at Brandon. Starting with personnel changes. Brandon made a small sound of protest, but Lucas kept talking. You're suspended, effective immediately. 2 weeks, unpaid. When you come back, you'll go through a complete retraining program. If you complete it successfully, you keep your job. If not, or if anything like this happens again, you're gone. Clear? Brandon nodded mutely. Lucas turned to Paul. Take her to the presidential suite personally. Make sure she has everything she needs. And get me the contact information for every guest who's had a reservation discrepancy in the last 6 months. I want to review every single case. Paul opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded. Of course. The woman pocketed Lucas's card and lowered her phone finally, ending the stream. I'm still posting this. I would too, Lucas said, but maybe add a follow-up tomorrow. Show people what happens when a company actually tries to fix its mistakes instead of just covering them up. We'll see. She picked up her bags. Presidential suite better be worth it. It is, and if it's not, you have my personal number on that card. Call me directly. She left with Paul, and the lobby slowly began to return to normal, conversations resuming, the incident being absorbed into the night's chaos. Lucas stood behind the front desk and looked at Patricia, who'd witnessed the whole thing with wide eyes. "You're in charge of the desk for the rest of the night," he told her. "I want a report on my desk tomorrow morning detailing every reservation issue from this evening and how it was handled. Everything. No filters." "Yes, sir." Lucas stepped out from behind the desk and found himself face to face with a dozen guests who'd watched the confrontation. Some looked approving. Some looked uncomfortable. One older man in an expensive suit looked actively hostile. "That was quite a performance," the man said. "But surely you could have handled that more discreetly, making a scene in the lobby, embarrassing your staff in front of guests." "My staff embarrassed themselves," Lucas said. "I just made sure it didn't get swept under the rug like it probably has been for months." "Still, there are ways to handle these things." "Yeah, and the quiet ways haven't been working." Lucas was done with this conversation. He turned and walked toward the cafe, leaving the man sputtering behind him. His heart was pounding, adrenaline making his hands shake slightly. That had been risky. Revealing himself, confronting Brandon publicly, making promises he'd now have to keep. But it had also been necessary. Sometimes you had to crack the facade to fix what was underneath. The cafe was still chaotic when he returned, though the energy had shifted. Word was spreading. Lucas could see it in the way staff members were whispering, the way eyes tracked him as he moved through the space. The owner was here. The owner had just fired someone in the lobby. The owner was apparently losing his mind. Let them think that. Better than thinking everything was fine. Lucas found Emily at the bar, picking up drinks for her section. She glanced at him as he approached, and he saw recognition flicker across her face. Not surprise exactly, but confirmation of something she'd already suspected. "So," she said quietly. "Consultant, huh? I needed to see the truth. Did you find it?" "More than I wanted to." Lucas leaned against the bar, suddenly exhausted. "You were right about Friday nights. People show you who they really are when they're stressed." Emily loaded her tray with practiced efficiency. "That include you?" "Probably." "What are you going to do about it? About all of this?" She gestured vaguely at the cafe, but Lucas knew she meant the hotel, the culture, everything that was broken. "Fix it. Or try to." "People have been trying to fix things here for a while. Hasn't worked yet." "That's because they were trying to fix symptoms instead of the disease." Lucas straightened. "Can I ask you something? Why do you still care? After 2 years of watching this place forget what it's supposed to be, why do you still carry safety pins and help crying kids and treat every guest like they matter?" Emily was quiet for a moment, balancing her tray. "Because somebody has to. And if I stop caring just because the system is broken, then I'm part of what's breaking it." She started to walk away, then paused. "Besides, it's not about the hotel. It's about the people." The little girl with the rabbit, she didn't care about luxury service or brand standards. She just needed someone to see that she was upset and help. That's the job, the real one. Everything else is just window dressing. She left to deliver her drinks, and Lucas stood at the bar thinking about window dressing and what it hid. The rest of Friday night was a blur of small crises and large revelations. Lucas watched the dinner service collapse into controlled chaos. Orders wrong, tables waited too long, tempers fraying on both sides of the service divide. He watched Marcus get yelled at by a guest for bringing the wrong wine, then watched Robert the manager fail to back him up. He watched a couple get charged for drinks they didn't order and have to fight with the bartender to get it corrected. He watched the kitchen doors swing open to reveal stressed cooks working in conditions that probably violated safety codes. And through it all, he watched Emily maintain her quiet competence, somehow managing to keep her section running smoothly while chaos bloomed around her. She didn't cut corners, didn't let stress make her careless, just kept showing up for each table with the same attention she'd given the first. By 10 p.m., Lucas couldn't watch anymore. He paid his tab and headed for the lobby, planning to leave and come back tomorrow to continue his investigation. But as he passed the front desk, he overheard a conversation that stopped him cold. Patricia was checking in a guest, an elderly woman with 2 large suitcases and an air of exhaustion that suggested a long journey. The woman was explaining something about her reservation, but Patricia kept interrupting. "Ma'am, I understand, but without a credit card, I can't complete your check-in. It's hotel policy." "I have cash. I can pay for the entire stay right now." "We require a credit card on file for incidentals." "I don't have a credit card. I have cash." Patricia's smile was strained. "Then I'm afraid I can't help you. Perhaps you could try another hotel?" The woman's shoulders slumped. "I've been traveling for 14 hours. This is where my daughter booked my room. Please. I just need to sleep." "I'm sorry, but policy is policy." Lucas stepped forward. "What's the problem?" Patricia looked up, clearly not thrilled to have the owner watching her handle this. "No credit card. I was just explaining that we can't—" "Make an exception." "Sir? Make an exception. Take her cash as a deposit. Give her the room." "But the policy states—" "I wrote the policy. I can change it. Give her the room." Patricia's mouth compressed into a thin line, but she turned back to her computer and started processing the check-in. The elderly woman looked at Lucas with gratitude that made him feel simultaneously good and terrible. Good that he'd helped, terrible that help had been necessary in the first place. "Thank you," the woman said softly. "I'm sorry you had to ask," Lucas replied. He watched Patricia complete the check-in with barely concealed irritation, then hand over the room keys with a smile that looked painful. When the woman left, Lucas stayed at the desk. "That policy exists to protect against fraud," Patricia said defensively. "I was following procedure." "The procedure is there to serve guests, not block them. Use judgment. That woman clearly wasn't trying to defraud us." "How was I supposed to know that?" "By looking at her, by listening to her, by remembering that the point of this place is to help people, not create obstacles." Lucas rubbed his eyes. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years. "And in those 3 years, how many times have you made an exception to policy because it was the right thing to do?" Patricia was quiet. "That's what I thought." Lucas turned to go, then looked back. "Starting Monday, things are changing. You can either change with them or find somewhere else to work where following rules matters more than helping people. Your choice." He left her staring after him and finally headed for the exit. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, reflecting the city lights in shimmering pools. Lucas stood on the sidewalk and breathed in the cold October air, letting it clear his head. His phone was buzzing nonstop now, messages from Paul, from Rachel, from board members who'd somehow already heard about the lobby incident. He ignored all of them. Tomorrow was Saturday. He'd give himself the weekend to finalize his plan. Then Monday, he'd start implementing changes. Real changes. Not the superficial kind that looked good in press releases but didn't alter the fundamental culture. He needed to rebuild the entire operational framework. New training programs focused on dignity and equity. New metrics that measured cultural health, not just financial performance. New accountability structures that rewarded people like Emily who understood what hospitality actually meant. It was going to be expensive, disruptive. Some people would fight it. Some would quit rather than adapt. The board would push back on anything that threatened quarterly returns. Lucas didn't care. He'd spent a week watching his dream curdle into something ugly, and he was done pretending the numbers told the whole story. Sometimes you had to burn down what you'd built and start over, even if it hurt, even if it cost you, especially then. He pulled out his phone and opened his notes app, starting a new document titled Grand Crest Cultural Reconstruction. Then he started typing, capturing everything he'd learned, every change that needed to happen, every system that needed to be torn down and rebuilt. He was still typing when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Hale?" A woman's voice, uncertain. "Speaking. This is Vanessa Chen. You gave me your card earlier. The presidential suite situation?" "Of course. Is everything all right with the room?" "The room is incredible. That's not why I'm calling." She paused. "I wanted to say thank you, not just for the room, but for actually listening, for not making excuses or hiding behind corporate speak. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. It should have never happened in the first place." "But it did. And you didn't pretend it didn't. Didn't try to make it my problem to solve quietly. That matters." Another pause. "I work in hospitality too. Operations management for a hotel group in Chicago. What I saw tonight, what you did in that lobby, that took guts. Most owners would have smoothed it over privately and hoped the video disappeared. Lucas leaned against the wet brick wall of a closed storefront. Did you post it? Not yet. I wanted to see if you meant what you said about following up tomorrow. I meant it. Then I'll wait. And if you actually follow through, I'll post that instead. Show people what accountability looks like. They talked for another 10 minutes, Vanessa sharing her own experiences with discrimination in luxury hotels, Lucas taking notes on ideas she had for structural changes. When they hung up, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope, not the easy kind that came from ignoring problems, the hard kind that came from facing them head-on and believing you could do better. He walked home through the quiet streets, his mind already working through implementation timelines, budget allocations, the dozens of details that would turn intentions into reality. By the time he reached his building, he had the skeleton of a plan that might actually work. His apartment felt too big and too quiet when he let himself in. The cleaning service had been through, leaving everything spotless and impersonal. Lucas dropped his keys on the counter and thought about his daughter, probably asleep at Margaret's house, probably wondering where her dad was and why work always seemed more important than she did. He'd make it up to her. Somehow. When this was done and the hotel was fixed and he could breathe again without feeling like he was maintaining a lie. But first, he had to finish what he'd started. Lucas opened his laptop and worked until 3 in the morning, building the framework for everything that needed to change. Training programs, policy revisions, compensation restructuring, guest feedback systems that actually mattered, staff support mechanisms, cultural audits, accountability measures. And at the center of it all, a simple principle that he wrote in bold at the top of the document. Every person who walks through our doors matters. No exceptions, no qualifications, no sliding scale based on appearance or wealth or race. Just dignity. For everyone. It sounded simple. It was going to be hell to implement. Lucas saved the document and closed his laptop, his eyes gritty with exhaustion. He'd sleep for a few hours, then spend Saturday refining the plan, then Sunday getting ready for Monday's reckoning. But before he slept, he sent one more email. To HR, with a subject line that read, Priority Request. The body of the email was brief. I need the complete personnel file for Emily Carter, cafe server at the Grand Crest. And I need a list of every employee who's been with us since opening who still maintains the standards we claim to value. I want to know who's been fighting to keep this place honest while I wasn't paying attention. By Monday morning. He hit send and finally let himself fall into bed. Monday was going to change everything. He just hoped he had the courage to see it through. Saturday morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through Lucas's apartment windows, and he woke up feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. 3 hours of sleep wasn't enough, but his mind was already racing, pulling him out of bed and back to the laptop before he'd fully registered being awake. Emily Carter's personnel file sat in his inbox, delivered at 6 a.m. by an HR director who apparently didn't sleep either. Lucas opened it with coffee in hand, standing at his kitchen counter in sweatpants and yesterday's shirt. The file was thin. 2 years of employment, like she'd said. Hired initially for the breakfast shift at minimum wage plus tips. Promoted to full-time after 3 months with a note from her supervisor. Reliable, professional, guests respond well to her. 6 months later, another note. Never calls out. Willing to cover shifts. Should be considered for lead server position. But she'd never been promoted to lead. Lucas scanned through the performance reviews, all positive, all noting the same qualities. Dependable, courteous, attentive to detail. The kind of reviews that should have led somewhere but apparently hadn't. Then he found the incident reports. 3 of them over 2 years. The first one from 14 months ago, filed by Emily herself. A guest had grabbed her arm while she was clearing plates, pulled her close, and made what the report delicately termed inappropriate suggestions. The manager on duty that night had spoken to the guest, who'd apologized. Case closed. No follow-up about whether Emily felt safe returning to work. No mention of whether the guest faced any consequences beyond a conversation. The second report, 8 months ago. A different guest had followed Emily into the employee corridor after his meal, claiming he wanted to compliment her service personally. Another server had intervened before anything happened. The manager's note said, "Situation resolved. reminded staff about security protocols. Nothing about the guest being asked to leave or banned from the property. The third report was from 6 weeks ago, and Lucas's hands tightened on his coffee mug as he read it. A guest had left Emily a $100 tip with his phone number and a note that said, "Call me if you ever want to make real money." Emily had reported it because she felt uncomfortable, and the manager's response was documented. Explain to Ms. Carter that generous tips are appreciated gestures and she should not read anything inappropriate into guest kindness. No action required. Lucas set down the mug before he broke it. This wasn't just about discrimination based on appearance or race. This was about a complete failure to protect staff from harassment, wrapped up in language that made victims feel like they were the problem for noticing the harassment in the first place. He kept reading. Emily's employment application listed a previous job at a diner in Queens, 3 years, left because the restaurant closed. Before that, 2 years at a coffee shop. Steady employment history, references that checked out. Education listed as high school plus 2 years of community college, no degree completed. A note in her own handwriting on the application under, "Why do you want to work here?" That said simply, "I'm good at taking care of people and I want to work somewhere that values that." Lucas felt something crack in his chest. She'd come to the Grand Crest believing it was different, believing the marketing he'd put out into the world about dignity and respect and treating everyone like they mattered. And the hotel had taken that belief and slowly crushed it through 2 years of small betrayals and ignored complaints and managers who cared more about not making waves than protecting their staff. He opened the second email from HR. The list of employees who'd been with the Grand Crest since opening and still maintained high-performance standards. 15 names out of an original staff of over 200. 85% turnover in 8 years. The names that remained were mostly in housekeeping and maintenance, the positions that guests barely noticed and management often forgot about. Lucas recognized one name, Maria Gonzalez, head of housekeeping. He'd personally hired her during the renovation, impressed by her 20 years of experience and her firm handshake, and the way she'd looked him in the eye and said, "I don't work for hotels that cut corners. You cut corners. You disrespect the guests and the staff. You planning to cut corners?" He'd promised her then that the Grand Crest would be different, that they'd do it right. He needed to call Maria, needed to talk to all 15 of these people and find out what they'd witnessed while he was too busy looking at spreadsheets to notice his hotel eating itself from the inside. But first, he needed to finalize his plan for Monday. The confrontation with Paul and the executive team that would either transform the Grand Crest or blow up in his face spectacularly. Lucas spent Saturday building a presentation that felt more like a declaration of war. Every slide documented something broken. Photos he'd taken covertly of discriminatory treatment, transcripts of conversations he'd overheard, data showing the correlation between staff turnover and declining guest satisfaction. He included Vanessa Chen's video, which she'd sent him that morning with a note. "Still waiting to see what you do next." The final slide was simple, just text on a black background. "We are not in the business of selling rooms. We are in the business of treating people like they matter. If we can't do that, we shouldn't exist." He practiced the presentation twice, alone in his apartment, feeling ridiculous and necessary in equal measure. By Saturday evening, he was as ready as he'd ever be. Sunday was supposed to be for rest, for refining, for mental preparation. Instead, Lucas found himself back at the Grand Crest at 10 a.m., unable to stay away. The Sunday morning crowd was different. More families, more tourists, fewer business travelers. The pace was slower, the energy lighter. Lucas got coffee from the cafe and found his usual spot in the forgotten alcove, watching the lobby wake up gradually. Emily wasn't working. Her schedule was posted in the staff area. He'd looked it up in the HR system, and she had Sundays off. Lucas told himself that was fine, that he didn't need to observe her anymore, that he had all the information he needed. But he found himself missing her quiet presence anyway, the reminder that something good still existed in this place he'd built. Around 11, he saw Maria Gonzalez crossing the lobby with the purposeful stride of someone who had 100 things to do and not enough time to do them. She was in her early 60s, compact and strong, with silver hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. Lucas stood and intercepted her path. "Maria, do you have a minute?" She stopped and he watched recognition dawn. "Mr. Hale, I heard you were around this week, causing trouble." Is that what people are saying? People are saying a lot of things, most of it probably true. She crossed her arms. What do you need? Your honest opinion about what's happened to this place. Maria studied him for a long moment, and Lucas had the uncomfortable feeling of being weighed and found wanting. Then she jerked her head toward the elevators. Walk with me. I've got rooms to check. Lucas followed her into the service elevator, the one staff used to move between floors without encountering guests. It was functional and ugly, the opposite of the guest elevators with their mirrors and soft lighting. You really want to know what happened? Maria said as the elevator climbed. I'll tell you. You stopped paying attention. You hired good people, set good standards, then you left it to managers who cared more about their bonuses than their staff. And bit by bit, the good people either left or learned to stop caring because caring got you nowhere. You stayed. I stayed because I'm stubborn and I need the health insurance. Don't mistake that for loyalty. The doors opened on the 15th floor, and Maria led him down a corridor where a housekeeping cart sat outside an open room. She grabbed a clipboard from the cart and scanned it while talking. You know how many people I've trained in 8 years? 47. You know how many still work here? 3. The rest left because the pay is barely livable. The guests treat them like servants, and management acts like they're replaceable. What would it take to fix that? Maria looked up from her clipboard. You asking for real, or are you asking so you can feel better about ignoring it? For real. Higher wages, mandatory respect training for guests, and I mean real consequences when they cross lines, not just conversations. Staff support systems that actually function, and managers who understand that their job is to protect their people, not protect the hotel's reputation. She paused. Also, stop making us use cheap cleaning supplies that wreck our hands. We're not idiots. We know you're cutting costs on the stuff guests never see. Lucas pulled out his phone and opened his notes. Say that again, the part about cleaning supplies. Maria raised an eyebrow but repeated it, and Lucas typed it all down. Then he asked her to walk him through every cost-cutting measure she'd seen implemented in the last 3 years. Every complaint she'd filed that went nowhere. Every good employee she'd watched quit because the hotel had ground them down. They spent an hour going room to room while Maria talked and Lucas took notes. And by the end of it, he had a list of operational changes that would cost money but might actually address the rot at the root level. You really planning to do something about this? Maria asked when they were done. Tomorrow. Executive meeting. I'm going to present everything I found this week and demand immediate changes. They're going to fight you. I know. Some of them will quit rather than change. I'm counting on it. Maria smiled, and it was the first genuine warmth he'd seen from her. Good. About time someone shook things up around here. This place used to mean something. It will again, Lucas said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. He left Maria to her work and spent the rest of Sunday walking the hotel, talking to staff members who were willing to talk to him. Most were wary. Word had spread about who he was and what he'd done on Friday night, but a few opened up when they realized he was actually listening. A bartender told him about having to comp drinks for VIP guests who'd run up tabs and then refuse to pay, with management always siding with the guests to avoid bad reviews. A valet told him about guests who threw their keys at him and made racist comments, and supervisors who told him to develop thicker skin. A bellhop told him about a tip-sharing system that had been quietly changed 6 months ago to benefit front desk staff at the expense of everyone else. Every conversation added another item to Lucas's growing list of changes. By Sunday evening, that list had 53 specific action items, each one representing a small failure that had accumulated into systemic dysfunction. He went home and didn't sleep much. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, and Lucas dressed carefully in a suit that cost more than most people made in a month. The torn jeans and worn jacket went back in the closet. Today he needed to look like the owner he was, needed the armor of wealth and power to back up the truths he was about to tell. The executive meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the conference room on the 37th floor. Lucas arrived at 8:30 and spent the time reviewing his presentation one last time, making sure every claim was documented, every argument airtight. Paul arrived at 8:45, looking like he hadn't slept either. Lucas, I have the cultural reform plan you requested. I think you'll find it comprehensive. We'll see. Before we start, I want to say that I understand you're upset about what you saw this week, but I hope you'll consider the broader context. Making dramatic changes based on a few days of observation might be... Paul, save it for the meeting. The rest of the executive team filtered in over the next 10 minutes. CFO Thompson, with his permanent expression of fiscal concern. VP of Operations, Jennifer Martinez, looking professionally composed. VP of Guest Experience, David Chen, with his tablet already out, ready to take notes. Head of HR, Sandra Williams, wearing the careful, neutral expression of someone who knew a storm was coming. Lucas waited until they were all seated, then stood at the head of the table and pulled up his presentation on the screen. Thanks for coming. We're going to talk about the Grand Crest and why it's failing. Thompson immediately objected. Failing? Our revenue is up 4% year over year. Guest satisfaction is within acceptable ranges. Occupancy rates are irrelevant if we're destroying the culture that's supposed to make this hotel worth visiting. Lucas clicked to the first slide, a photo he'd taken of Brandon dismissing the young couple with backpacks. I spent last week undercover in this hotel, dressed like someone who couldn't afford to stay here, watching how staff treats guests, how management treats staff, how we've systematically betrayed every value we claim to hold. He walked them through it all. The discrimination at the front desk, the harassment of Emily and other servers, the cost-cutting measures that hurt staff, the reservation flagging that targeted minorities, the complete absence of consequences for guest misconduct. Every slide documented another failure, another crack in the foundation. The room grew very quiet. When Lucas reached the slide about Emily's incident reports, Jennifer spoke up. With respect, individual incidents happen at every hotel. We have protocols for handling complaints. Your protocols are garbage. Lucas pulled up Emily's file. 3 separate incidents of harassment over 2 years. 3 times she reported feeling unsafe. And your response was to tell her she was overreacting, to explain guest behavior away, to make it her problem to manage. Is that the protocol you're defending? Jennifer's face flushed. We have to balance employee concerns with guest relations. No, we don't. When a guest harasses an employee, we choose the employee. Every single time. No balance, no consideration, no protecting the guest relationship. We protect our people. That's the balance. That's not realistic, Thompson interjected. If we banned every guest who made an employee uncomfortable, we'd have no guests left. Lucas felt his temper snap. Then maybe we deserve to have no guests. Maybe we don't deserve to exist as a business if we can't figure out how to operate without sacrificing our staff's safety and dignity. He clicked to the next slide. Vanessa Chen's video, frozen on her face as she filmed the front desk confrontation. This went live Saturday night, 400,000 views so far, growing by the hour. She posted a follow-up this morning saying she's waiting to see if we actually change or if Friday was just damage control. The entire hospitality industry is watching us right now. What do you think they're going to see? Paul cleared his throat. I have a comprehensive plan for cultural reform that addresses many of these concerns. Let's hear it. Paul pulled out a bound document and began reading. Additional training modules on inclusive service, revised complaint protocols with better documentation, a diversity task force to review policies quarterly, guest feedback surveys with specific questions about equitable treatment, mandatory workshops on unconscious bias. It was thorough, professional, completely insufficient. Lucas let him finish, then said, That's a good start. Now here's what we're actually doing. He pulled up his own plan. Not suggestions. Mandates. Immediate termination for any employee found discriminating against guests or staff. 0 tolerance for guest harassment. 1 incident, and you're permanently banned from all properties. Wage increases for all hourly staff funded by reducing executive bonuses. Revised tip sharing that actually benefited service workers. Required manager rotations through service positions so they remembered what the work actually felt like. Cultural audits every quarter with results tied to management compensation. Staff councils with real power to influence policy. And one more thing. Effective immediately, I'm creating a new position, Director of Cultural Integrity. Someone whose only job is to make sure we're living up to our values, with authority to override operational decisions that violate those values. They'll report directly to me, not through the normal management chain. Thompson looked like he might have a heart attack. Lucas, the cost of these changes would reduce our profit margins by at least 15%. The board will never approve. I don't need board approval. I own 60% of this company. This isn't a discussion. It's a notification. You're being emotional, Jennifer said. You spent a few days seeing the worst of our operations, and now you want to restructure everything based on anecdotal evidence. This isn't anecdotal. This is systemic. And yes, I'm emotional about it. I'm emotional that I built something I thought mattered and watched it turn into just another luxury hotel where money determines humanity. If that's emotional, then emotion is exactly what we need more of around here. Sandra from HR spoke for the first time. Who did you have in mind for Director of Cultural Integrity? Lucas clicked to his final slide, a photo of Emily he'd pulled from her employee file, her face serious and open and real. Emily Carter, current cafe server. 2 years of experience watching this place forget what it's supposed to be. She's the only person I met all week who still understands what hospitality actually means. The room erupted. Paul objected that Emily had no management experience. Jennifer said you couldn't promote someone multiple levels based on intangibles. Thompson insisted it would devastate morale to promote a server over people who'd worked their way up through proper channels. Lucas let them argue for 5 minutes, then held up his hand. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you what's happening. If you can't work within this new structure, I'll accept your resignation effective immediately, and we'll find people who can. Silence fell like a weight. Anyone? Lucas looked around the table. Because I'm serious. If you don't believe people matter more than profits, if you think dignity should have a price tag, then you're part of the problem and I don't want you here. One by one, they shook their heads. Even Thompson, who looked like he was swallowing glass. Good. Then here's what happens next. Paul, you've got 72 hours to implement the immediate action items on my list. Jennifer, you're going to personally review every employee complaint from the last 3 years and prepare a report on which ones were mishandled. Thompson, you're going to find the money for wage increases without cutting staff. Sandra, you're going to draft the job description for Director of Cultural Integrity and have it ready by end of day. He paused. And I'm going to talk to Emily Carter about whether she's interested in saving this place from itself. Lucas dismissed the meeting and walked out before anyone could argue further, his heart hammering against his ribs. That had been brutal and necessary in equal measure, and he had no idea if it would actually work or if he'd just blown up his own company. But at least he'd tried. He took the elevator down to the lobby, then walked to the cafe. Monday morning service was in full swing, Emily moving through her section with the same quiet competence he'd observed all week. Lucas waited until she had a moment, then approached her station. Emily, can we talk? She looked up and he saw wariness flash across her face. I'm working. I know, this will just take a minute. If this is about me telling you to check out Friday nights, I wasn't trying to... It's not about that. I need to offer you a job. Emily blinked. I have a job. A different job. Director of Cultural Integrity. Full-time, salaried, benefits, office on the executive floor. Your job would be to make sure the Grand Crest actually lives up to the values it claims to have. She stared at him like he'd started speaking a different language. You're joking. I'm not joking. I just came from an executive meeting where I told my entire management team that we're implementing major cultural reforms and you're going to lead them. I'm a waitress. You're a person who understands what hospitality means. That's more important than any management degree. Lucas pulled out a chair at the nearest empty table. Sit with me for a minute, please. Emily glanced at her section, saw that everyone was settled, then sat down carefully on the edge of the chair like she might need to bolt at any moment. Lucas sat across from her. I read your personnel file, the incident reports, the reviews, everything. You've been trying to do this job the right way for 2 years while management failed you over and over again. I want to give you the authority to make sure that stops happening, to everyone. I don't know anything about running a department. You know when something is wrong. You know when people are being mistreated. You know what dignity looks like in practice. Everything else we can teach you. Emily was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded on the table. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. Why me? Because you carry safety pins in your apron. Because you kneel down to help crying kids even when no one's watching. Because you've been harassed and dismissed and undervalued, and you still show up every day choosing to treat people with respect. That's not just good service, that's character. And character is what this place needs. I barely finished community college. I don't care about your credentials. I care about whether you can look at how this hotel operates and see what needs to change. Can you do that? She met his eyes, and Lucas saw something shift in her expression. calculation giving way to something that looked like careful hope. You're really serious about this. I've never been more serious about anything. What if I'm not good at it? What if I fail? Then you'll fail trying to make things better, which is more than most people can say. Lucas leaned forward. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. This job will be hard. You'll be fighting against systems that have been in place for years. People will resent you for being promoted over them. Some staff will think you've sold out. Some managers will think you don't belong. But you'll have my full support and the authority to make real changes. The question is whether you're willing to try. Emily looked down at her hands, and Lucas saw them trembling slightly. Can I think about it? Of course. Take until end of day. But Emily? He waited until she looked up. This isn't charity. This isn't me feeling sorry for you. This is me recognizing that you're exactly what the Grand Crest needs, what I need. Someone who still believes service means something. She nodded slowly, then stood. I should get back to my tables. Of course. Lucas watched her walk away, her posture straight despite the visible uncertainty in her movements. He had no idea if she'd accept, if she'd even believe the offer was real, but he'd meant every word. The Grand Crest needed someone who understood that hospitality wasn't about marble floors and crystal chandeliers. It was about seeing people and responding to who they were, not what they looked like or how much money they had. It was about safety pins and small kindnesses and the belief that everyone deserved dignity. Emily understood that in her bones. Now Lucas just had to convince her that understanding was worth building a career on. He left the cafe and spent the rest of Monday implementing the immediate changes he'd mandated. He personally delivered Brandon's termination papers, ignoring the man's protests about unfair treatment. He sat with Maria Gonzalez and approved her entire list of supply upgrades. He met with every department head and made it clear that the new policies weren't suggestions, they were requirements, and failure to implement them was a resignation. By 5 p.m., Lucas was exhausted and wired in equal measure. He was back in his office when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It's Emily. How did you get my number? Lucas smiled and typed back, HR file. Sorry if that's creepy. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Then, it's a little creepy. But I guess you're the boss. Another pause. Then, can we talk more about the job? Not in the cafe, somewhere private, Lucas replied. My office. 37th floor. Come up whenever you're ready. 20 minutes later, his assistant knocked and announced Emily Carter. Lucas stood as she entered, watching her take in the office with wide eyes. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, the furniture that probably cost more than she made in a year, all the trappings of wealth and power that must seem impossible from where she stood. Nice view, she said quietly. It's better from down in the lobby. More honest. Lucas gestured to the chairs by the window. Please, sit. Emily sat, and Lucas took the chair across from her rather than retreating behind his desk. Equal footing, or as close as they could get given the circumstances. I'm scared, Emily said suddenly. Of this job, of failing, of becoming one of those people who forgets what it's like to actually serve tables and deal with difficult guests. That's good. Fear means you understand what you're taking on. Lucas leaned back. Can I tell you what I'm scared of? She nodded. I'm scared that I've broken something I can't fix, that the changes I'm trying to make are too little, too late, that even with new policies and new leadership, the damage to this place's culture is permanent. He paused. But I'm more scared of not trying, of letting the Grand Crest keep operating this way because changing it is hard. Emily was quiet, her hands folded in her lap, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she said, If I take this job, I want to do it right. I want authority to actually make changes, not just suggest them and watch them get ignored. You'll have it. Direct reporting line to me. Budget for training and programs. Power to override operational decisions that conflict with our values. And if I make mistakes, you'll make mistakes. We'll learn from them. Together. Lucas met her eyes. I'm not looking for perfection, Emily. I'm looking for someone who gives a damn. Do you? She smiled, small and uncertain but real. Yeah, I give a damn. Then is that a yes? Emily took a deep breath, held it, then let it out slowly. It's a yes, on one condition. Name it. You promise me that if I tell you something is wrong, even if it's expensive or inconvenient or makes the board angry, you'll listen, really listen. Not just patronize me and do what you were going to do anyway. Lucas extended his hand. I promise, you have my word. She shook his hand, her grip firm despite the tremor he felt running through her fingers. Then I'm in. When do I start? How about now? We've got a hotel to rebuild. 3 months later, Lucas stood in the same forgotten alcove near the elevators where he'd first watched his hotel reveal its true nature and tried to figure out if anything had actually changed. The lobby looked the same. Marble floors still gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Guests still moved through the space with the particular purpose of people who had places to be. The cafe still served excellent coffee. On the surface, the Grand Crest appeared identical to the version that had existed before Lucas's week-long investigation. But surfaces lied. Lucas had learned that the hard way. The first month after Emily's promotion had been brutal. Half the management team had pushed back hard against the new cultural policies, treating them like temporary insanity that would pass once Lucas came to his senses. Jennifer Martinez had quit after 2 weeks, sending a resignation email that accused Lucas of prioritizing feelings over operational excellence. Thompson had stayed but made his displeasure known in every budget meeting, pointing out the exact dollar amount that dignity was costing them. Staff reaction had been mixed. Some embraced the changes immediately, relieved that someone finally cared about the problems they'd been living with. Others were skeptical, having seen too many corporate initiatives that promised transformation and delivered nothing. A few were openly hostile, particularly the front desk staff who resented taking orders from someone who'd been serving coffee 3 weeks earlier. Emily had struggled. Lucas could see it in the way she carried herself during those first weeks. Shoulders tight with tension, doubt creeping into her voice during meetings, the constant second-guessing of someone who'd been handed authority without the credentials to back it up. She'd called him at midnight once, 2 weeks into the job, her voice shaky. I don't know what I'm doing. I tried to implement the new harassment reporting system today, and 3 managers told me I was overcomplicating simple procedures. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm in over my head. Lucas had been at home, Sophie finally asleep after an hour of bedtime negotiations. He'd walked out onto his balcony and looked toward Midtown, toward the hotel that was trying to kill itself slowly while he tried to save it. Are you overcomplicating it, or are they uncomfortable being held accountable? He'd asked. Silence on the other end. Then quietly, I don't know how to tell the difference. Yes, you do. You just don't trust yourself yet. Lucas had leaned against the railing, cold November air cutting through his shirt. Emily, those managers spent years building a system where harassment got swept under the rug because addressing it was inconvenient. You're tearing that system down. Of course they're going to tell you you're doing it wrong. The question is whether you believe them. Another pause. I don't. Believe them, I mean. I think they're just mad someone's paying attention. Then you already know what you're doing. You just need to trust it. She'd hung up sounding steadier, and the next day she'd implemented the new system over 3 separate objections, documenting each one and sending Lucas a report that detailed exactly why the managers were wrong. She was learning, slowly, painfully, but learning. The second month brought different challenges. Word had spread through the hospitality industry about what Lucas was doing at the Grand Crest, and opinions were sharply divided. Some competitors called him naive, predicting the hotel would hemorrhage money and fail within a year. Others were quietly watching, curious whether you could actually run a luxury property on principles instead of profit margins. Vanessa Chen had posted her follow-up video. 600,000 views. She'd interviewed Lucas about the changes, and he'd been honest about the difficulty, about the resistance, about the fact that cultural transformation was messy and expensive and might not work. But it's worth trying, he'd said on camera, because what's the alternative? Keep running hotels where some people matter and others don't? That's not hospitality. That's just capitalism with expensive furniture. The video had generated death threats from people who thought Lucas was destroying American business values. It had also generated job applications from service workers across the country who wanted to work somewhere that might actually value them. Emily had been the one to sort through those applications, identifying candidates who understood service as calling rather than just employment. They'd hired 12 new people in 8 weeks, each one selected not for their resume, but for the way they talked about guests, about dignity, about what it meant to take care of strangers. Maria Gonzalez had helped with the hiring. She'd sat in on interviews and asked blunt questions that made candidates uncomfortable, then recommended the ones who answered honestly instead of with corporate platitudes. You can teach someone to clean a room, she'd told Lucas. You can't teach them to care whether the person staying in it feels welcome. Either they get it or they don't. By month 3, something started to shift. Lucas noticed it in small ways first. A front desk clerk named James, one of the new hires, stopped a well-dressed businessman from cutting in front of an elderly couple in line. "These folks were here first, sir. I'll be with you in just a moment." The businessman had started to argue, then seemed to register that the clerk actually meant it, and stepped back. Lucas noticed servers checking on guests based on need rather than appearance. Noticed the concierge spending equal time helping a family find free activities as he did booking helicopter tours for wealthy guests. Noticed security treating everyone with the same baseline respect. No more profiling, no more assumptions based on clothing or skin color. It wasn't perfect, not even close. Old habits died hard, and some staff members still operated on the old system when they thought no one was watching. But the direction had changed. The culture was bending, slowly, toward something that looked like the vision Lucas had started with 8 years ago. Emily had grown into the role in ways Lucas hadn't anticipated. She'd stopped apologizing for her decisions, started speaking up in executive meetings with a quiet authority that came from actually knowing what was happening on the ground floor. She'd implemented a staff council that gave hourly workers direct input on policy changes, and the first meeting had generated 17 pages of suggestions that management had never considered because they'd never asked. She'd also started dressing differently. Not in expensive suits, Emily would never be comfortable in that kind of armor, but in simple professional clothes that suggested she'd stop trying to be invisible. Lucas had noticed the change during a meeting 2 weeks ago. The way she sat differently in her chair, claimed space instead of shrinking into it. "What?" Emily had asked, catching him looking. "Nothing. You just seem more comfortable." "I'm not comfortable, but I'm tired of acting like I don't belong here." She'd pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop. Now, about the customer feedback data. She was right to be tired of shrinking. She'd earned her place at the table, even if half the executives still treated her like an interloper who'd gotten lucky. Lucas pushed off from the wall of his alcove and walked toward the cafe. Monday afternoon, the slow period between lunch rush and dinner prep. He found Emily at a corner table with her laptop open, reviewing what looked like employee satisfaction surveys. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Emily looked up and smiled. A real smile. Not the careful one she'd worn during those first weeks. "It's your hotel." "It's our hotel." Lucas sat down. "How are the surveys looking?" "Better than I expected. 82% of staff say they feel more supported than they did 3 months ago. 76% say they've noticed positive changes in how guests are treated. 64% say they feel comfortable reporting problems without fear of retaliation. And the other 36%, either still skeptical or working in departments where their managers haven't bought in yet." Emily turned the laptop so he could see the breakdown. "Reservations and finance are our problem areas. They're still operating on the old metrics, still prioritizing efficiency over equity." Lucas scanned the data, noting the patterns. "We need to replace those department heads." "Already working on it, but finding people who have the technical skills and the right values is harder than I thought. Take your time. Better to leave positions empty than fill them with people who'll undermine what we're building." Emily nodded and closed the laptop. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you regret it? Blowing everything up like you did?" "The board is still furious. Revenue is down 8%. Every quarterly report, Thompson gives you that look like he's watching you ruin your own company." Lucas thought about it. The honest answer was complicated. "I regret that it took me so long to see what was happening. I regret that people like you had to suffer through years of harassment and indifference while I was congratulating myself on running successful hotels. But do I regret trying to fix it? No. Even if it costs us money. Even if some people never forgive me for it. Your daughter must miss you. I know you've been spending a lot of time here. Sophie's resilient. She's also 7, which means she's mostly concerned with whether I remember to pack the right snacks and if we can get a dog." Lucas smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm not winning any Father of the Year awards. but I'm trying to build something she can be proud of when she's old enough to understand what it means." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mom cleaned hotel rooms for 20 years. She worked at places like this, fancy properties where they treated her like she was invisible. She'd come home exhausted, and I'd ask her why she kept doing it, and she'd say, because people need clean rooms and someone has to care enough to do it right. I never really understood what she meant until I started working here. She sounds like someone I would have wanted on my staff. She would have liked what you're trying to do. She always said the problem with luxury hotels wasn't the luxury. It was that they forgot the hotel part, the taking care of people part." Emily looked out the cafe window at the Manhattan afternoon. She died 3 years ago, lung cancer from years of breathing and cleaning chemicals that hotels used because they were cheap. I think about that sometimes, about how the choices rich people make to save money actually kill the people who work for them. Lucas felt the words land like stones. "I'm sorry. For your mother. And for every decision I made that prioritized costs over people's health. I'm not telling you to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because it matters. Because these changes you're making, they're not just about making guests feel welcome. They're about whether the people who work here get to go home healthy at the end of their shift, whether they get treated like humans instead of resources." "I know, or I'm starting to." They sat in silence for a while, the cafe noises filling the space between them. Eventually, Emily said, "There's something I need to tell you. I got a job offer, another hotel, bigger chain, VP of guest experience. Double what you're paying me." Lucas felt his stomach drop. "Are you taking it?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to. It would be the smart career move, and it would prove I'm not just your charity case who got lucky." "You were never my charity case." "I know, but other people don't know that. And sometimes I wonder if I'm only succeeding here because you're protecting me. At another company, I'd have to prove myself without the owner running interference." "That's fair." Lucas made himself say the next part even though it hurt. "If you want to take the offer, I'll understand. I'll even write you a recommendation that'll make them wonder why they didn't offer you more money." Emily smiled slightly. "You're not going to try to convince me to stay? I'm going to tell you that you've transformed this hotel in 3 months in ways I couldn't have done in 3 years. That you're exactly the kind of leader the industry needs. And that whatever you decide, you should decide based on where you can do the most good, not where you'll be most comfortable. What if the most good is somewhere other than here? Then go. Build something great. Show the world that treating people with dignity isn't just morally right, it's actually good business." Lucas met her eyes. "But know that if you stay, we're just getting started. The Grand Crest is one hotel. I own 14 others, all of them probably suffering from the same cultural disease. You could help me fix all of them. Turn this from one successful experiment into an actual movement." Emily looked down at her hands, and Lucas saw her processing the weight of both options. Finally, she said, "Can I have a week to think about it?" "Take 2. She left shortly after, and Lucas sat alone in the cafe watching the afternoon shift change, watching servers rotate in and out, watching the small machine of hospitality continue its work. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophie via Margaret. "Dad, when are you coming home? I drew you a picture of a dog. It's named Biscuit." Lucas smiled and typed back, "Tomorrow morning. Can't wait to see Biscuit. Love you." Then he stood and walked through his hotel one more time, looking at it with eyes that had learned to see differently. He saw James at the front desk greet an exhausted-looking woman with genuine warmth, not checking her appearance first, just offering help. He saw Maria Gonzalez training a new housekeeper, not just on procedure but on pride. You're not just cleaning, you're creating a space where someone will sleep, rest, feel safe. That matters. Do it like it matters. He saw the bartender in the lobby lounge refuse to serve a drunk guest who was getting aggressive, calmly and firmly. "I think you've had enough tonight, sir. Let me call you a car." No manager had to intervene. No one had to escalate. The bartender had the authority to make the call and the backing to enforce it. Small moments, small victories. The kind that didn't show up in quarterly reports but meant everything. 2 weeks later, Emily walked into Lucas's office without knocking, a privilege she'd earned, and dropped into the chair across from his desk. "I'm staying," she said, "but I want equity. Not a lot. Just enough that I'm not just an employee. I want skin in the game." Lucas didn't hesitate. 5% of the Grand Crest, vesting over 4 years. And when we roll out the cultural program to the other properties, we'll negotiate additional equity based on results. Emily blinked. I was going to ask for 1%. I know, but you're worth 5. And I need you to know I'm serious about making you a partner in this, not just an employee with a fancy title. Deal. Emily extended her hand across the desk, and they shook on it. Now, we have a problem. I got a call from a server yesterday. Night shift. She says one of the regular guests has been making her uncomfortable for weeks. Nothing she can prove, just a feeling that he's watching her too closely, finding excuses to talk to her, staying later than he needs to. She's scared to report it officially because last time something like this happened, management did nothing. Lucas felt the old anger rise. What's the guest's name? Alexander Croft. Stays with us twice a month, always the same suite, spends a lot in the restaurant and bar. According to our records, he's a platinum member worth about $40,000 a year in revenue. Not anymore, he's not. Ban him. Today, permanently. Emily pulled out her phone. I already drafted the letter. I just wanted to make sure you'd back me up when he complains to the board. Send it, and if the board has a problem, they can bring it to me. She sent the email while Lucas watched. Then she looked up. You know this is going to keep happening, right? We're going to keep losing revenue from guests who don't like being held accountable. Eventually, the board is going to push back hard enough that we'll have to choose between our values and our business model. Then we'll choose our values and find a different business model. Lucas leaned back in his chair. I've been thinking about that, actually. What if we stopped trying to be a traditional luxury hotel? What if we built something different? A place where the luxury comes from how you're treated, not from how expensive the furniture is. Where we compete on dignity instead of amenities. That's a nice idea. I don't know if it works in practice. Neither do I. But I'm tired of trying to succeed at someone else's game. Maybe it's time to build our own. Emily smiled. You really are crazy, aren't you? Probably. You still in? Yeah, I'm still in. Over the next 2 months, Lucas and Emily worked on rebuilding the Grand Crest from the ground up. They redesigned the compensation system to reward cultural contributions, not just financial metrics. They created a guest code of conduct that made it clear harassment wouldn't be tolerated, even from high-paying customers. They implemented a system where staff could anonymously flag concerns and receive guaranteed responses within 24 hours. Some guests left. The ones who valued being able to treat staff badly more than they valued good service. Lucas watched the revenue numbers drop and refused to panic. Better to lose money than lose their humanity. But something unexpected happened. New guests started coming. People who'd heard about the Grand Crest transformation and wanted to support it. Families who were tired of staying at hotels where their kids watched adults be casually cruel to service workers. Business travelers who valued being treated with respect regardless of their position or appearance. The revenue didn't return to previous levels, but it stabilized at a place Lucas could live with. More importantly, staff turnover dropped to almost nothing. People stopped quitting, started telling their friends about job openings. The quality of applicants improved dramatically once word spread that the Grand Crest actually meant it about treating employees well. Productivity went up. Sick days went down. Guest satisfaction scores climbed steadily as service improved from people who actually wanted to be there. Thompson grudgingly admitted in a quarterly meeting that the financial picture was better than he'd predicted, though he still thought they were leaving money on the table by coddling staff and guests. We're not coddling anyone, Emily had responded coolly. We're treating them like human beings. If that feels like coddling to you, maybe examine why basic dignity seems excessive. Thompson had shut up after that. By the start of the new year, Lucas felt like they'd turned a corner. The Grand Crest wasn't perfect. Perfection was impossible with hundreds of people and thousands of daily interactions. But it was better, genuinely, measurably better. He was in his office on a Thursday afternoon when Emily appeared in the doorway with an unusual expression on her face. You need to come to the lobby, she said. Now. Lucas stood immediately, reading the urgency in her tone. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Just come. He followed her down to the lobby, where a small crowd had gathered near the front desk. As Lucas approached, he saw what had drawn their attention. A young couple with backpacks and worn clothes were checking in. The same couple Lucas had watched Brandon dismiss to the standard room queue months ago, and James, the front desk clerk, was treating them like they owned the place. "I've upgraded you to a deluxe king suite with park views, complimentary," James was saying. "We appreciate you choosing to stay with us. How was your flight?" The couple looked stunned. The woman said, "Our flight was fine, but you don't have to upgrade us. We're happy with whatever room." "I insist. You're celebrating your anniversary, according to your reservation notes. That deserves something special." James handed over the keys with a genuine smile. "And there's a bottle of champagne waiting in your room. On the house." Lucas watched the couple walk toward the elevators, dazed and happy, and felt something loosen in his chest. Emily appeared at his shoulder. James did that on his own. No one told him to. He just saw young people celebrating something important and decided to make it special. That's not policy. That's culture. Lucas nodded, not trusting his voice. "You did it," Emily continued quietly. "You actually changed things. It's not perfect, and it never will be, but it's real. It's working." "We did it," Lucas corrected. "I just pointed out the problem. You built the solution." "We built it together." Emily pulled out her phone. "Also, I need to show you something. Remember Vanessa Chen? She just posted another video." Emily played it on her phone. Vanessa was back at the Grand Crest, this time as a regular guest, and she'd filmed her entire stay. The video showed staff treating everyone with equal respect, showed the new harassment reporting posters in employee areas, showed the diversity in both staff and guests, showed the small moments of kindness that happened when culture actually valued dignity. "This is what accountability looks like," Vanessa said to the camera. Lucas Hale didn't just apologize. He burned down the system that allowed discrimination and rebuilt something better. It cost him money and relationships and probably some sleepless nights. But he did it anyway. And now the Grand Crest is the kind of place everyone deserves, but most people never get. A place where you're treated like you matter, no matter who you are. The video had 2 million views. Lucas handed the phone back to Emily. "That's going to generate a lot of attention." "It already has. I've gotten calls from 3 other hotel chains asking if we'd consult on their cultural reforms. And 2 business schools want to do case studies on what we're doing here." "What did you tell them?" "I told them to call you. This is your story to tell." "No," Lucas said. "It is our story. And the story is that fixing broken culture is possible, but only if you're willing to lose everything to do it right." Emily smiled. "That's a terrible sales pitch." "Good thing we're not selling anything. We're building something." Lucas looked around the lobby, watching the machine of hospitality work the way it was supposed to. Something that might actually last. 6 months after Lucas had walked into his own hotel dressed like someone who didn't belong, he brought Sophie to see what he'd been working on. She was 7.5 now, curious about why her dad had been spending so much time at work, and whether it was as important as he claimed. They walked through the lobby together, Lucas holding her hand, pointing out the small changes that added up to something significant. The diversity in the staff. The way the front desk clerk greeted everyone with the same warmth. The signs explaining the hotel's values and commitment to dignity for all. Sophie studied everything with serious attention, then said, "It looks like a normal hotel." Lucas laughed. "That's because good culture is supposed to be invisible. You only notice it when it's missing." They stopped for lunch in the cafe, and Sophie ordered a grilled cheese while Lucas got coffee. Emily spotted them from across the room and came over. "You must be Sophie," Emily said, crouching down to kid level. "Your dad talks about you all the time." Sophie looked at her father with surprise. "He does?" "All the time. You and someone named Biscuit. Biscuit is my pretend dog." Sophie turned to Lucas. "Can we get a real dog now? You said when work got less crazy." "We'll talk about it," Lucas said, which they both knew meant maybe. Emily smiled and stood. "Enjoy your lunch. And Sophie, your dad is doing something really important here, something that makes a lot of people's lives better. I hope you're proud of him." After Emily left, Sophie was quiet for a while, eating her sandwich thoughtfully. Finally, she said, "Is Miss Emily right? Are you making things better?" Lucas thought about how to explain complex systems and cultural transformation to a 7-year-old. "I'm trying to. I built this hotel a long time ago, and I thought I built it to be a good place. But it turned out I wasn't paying enough attention, and some not good things started happening. So now I'm fixing them." "What kind of not good things?" People weren't being nice to each other. Staff weren't being nice to guests. Guests weren't being nice to staff. Some people were treated better than others based on things that shouldn't matter. That's not okay. Sophie considered this. At school, Mrs. Patterson says everyone should be treated fair, no matter what. Mrs. Patterson is right. That's what I'm trying to do here. Make sure everyone gets treated fair. Even people who aren't rich? Especially people who aren't rich. Sophie nodded like this made sense. Then she said, "If you make everyone be nice here, can you make people be nice everywhere?" It was the kind of impossible question kids asked that cut right to the heart of things. Lucas felt the weight of it settle around him. I can't make everyone be nice everywhere. But maybe if we do it here, other people will see it's possible and try it in their places. And maybe slowly, one place at a time, the world gets a little better. That's going to take a long time. Yeah, kiddo, it is. Are you going to do it anyway? Lucas looked at his daughter, her serious eyes and grilled cheese fingers and the absolute certainty that her dad would do the right thing. Yeah, I'm going to do it anyway. She smiled, satisfied, and went back to her sandwich. That night, after dropping Sophie back at Margaret's and promising again to consider the dog situation, Lucas returned to the Grand Crest one more time. Not to work, just to see. He found his old spot in the alcove near the elevators and settled in to watch. The evening crowd was different now, more diverse, more relaxed, more like people who felt welcome instead of people who were checking whether they belonged. He watched a server help an elderly man with his coat, patient and kind. Watched the front desk clerk spend time with a confused guest, explaining directions without rushing. Watched security nod politely at everyone who passed. No profiling, no assumptions. And he watched Emily cross the lobby with a stack of papers, stop to help a guest who dropped their phone, then continue on without needing recognition for the small kindness. This was what they'd built. Not perfection, not utopia, just a place where people tried to treat each other with dignity because the culture supported it instead of punishing it. It wasn't enough to change the world, but it was enough to change this corner of it. And maybe that was how change actually worked. One corner at a time, one small choice at a time, one person at a time deciding that kindness mattered more than convenience. Lucas stood and walked toward the exit, ready to go home and sleep and start again tomorrow. As he passed through the brass doors, he saw the doorman, a new hire named Marcus, hold the door for a young woman in worn clothes and a tired face. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Grand Crest." She smiled, surprised by the warmth, and walked inside. Lucas stood on the sidewalk and watched through the glass as she approached the front desk, as James greeted her with genuine welcome, as the machine of hospitality worked the way it was supposed to. He pulled out his phone and texted Emily, "Thank you for taking a chance on this, for believing it could work." Her response came quickly. "Thank you for caring enough to try. See you Monday." Lucas pocketed his phone and started walking home through Manhattan streets that were cold and crowded and beautiful in their chaos. He thought about his daughter and her questions about making the world better, thought about his mother and the safety pins she'd carried, thought about all the people who'd suffered through his hotel's failures while he'd been too busy counting money to notice. He couldn't fix the past, couldn't undo the harm caused by years of indifference and systemic discrimination. But he could build something different going forward, could prove that treating people with dignity wasn't just morally right, but actually possible, actually sustainable, actually worth fighting for. It would be expensive, difficult, opposed by people who thought profit mattered more than principles. Some people would call him naive. Others would call him a failure when the numbers didn't match traditional success metrics. Lucas didn't care, because at the end of the day, when Sophie asked him what he did for work, he wanted to tell her something that mattered. Something about building places where everyone was treated like they deserved to be there. Where kindness wasn't reserved for people who could afford it. Where a waitress with safety pins in her apron could become a director because character mattered more than credentials. He wanted to tell her that he'd tried to make things better, even when it was hard, even when it cost him, even when people said it couldn't be done. That was worth more than any quarterly report. Lucas reached his building and rode the elevator up to his empty apartment. He poured a glass of water and stood at the window looking out over the city, over the thousands of lit windows containing thousands of lives he'd never know. Somewhere out there, someone was working a service job and being treated badly. Somewhere, someone was being judged by their appearance instead of their humanity. Somewhere, The machine of capitalism was grinding people into profit margins and calling it success. But in one hotel in Manhattan, things were different. Not perfect, not complete, but different. And different was a start. Lucas finished his water, set down the glass, and finally let himself believe they'd actually done it. They'd taken something broken and made it better. They'd proven that culture could change if you were willing to burn down the parts that didn't work and rebuild on principles that did. It wasn't the end of the work. It was barely the beginning. The other 14 hotels still needed transformation. The industry still operated on models that valued profit over people. The world still tilted toward those who had power and away from those who didn't. But tonight, for the first time in months, Lucas let himself feel something other than fear or anger or desperate determination. He felt hope, the real kind, the hard kind, the kind that knew how much work remained but believed it was worth doing anyway. Tomorrow he'd start planning the rollout to the other properties. Tomorrow he'd fight with the board about budgets and values. Tomorrow he'd navigate all the impossible complexity of trying to run a business on principles instead of just profit. But tonight, he'd sleep knowing that when a man in worn clothes walked into the Grand Crest, someone would greet him with the same warmth they'd show anyone else. That when a little girl dropped her toy, someone would kneel down to help. That when staff reported harassment, someone would actually listen and act. Small things, foundational things. The things that made the difference between a building full of rooms and a place that actually meant something. Lucas walked to his bedroom, lay down without bothering to change, and closed his eyes. His last thought before sleep was of Emily, somewhere across the city, probably still working, probably still fighting to make things better one policy at a time. They'd built something good. Not perfect, but good. And good was enough to build on.